Our story begins with a man looking at a portrait of someone. He comments that when he thought of the first thing he would see about him in 5 years, he would never have imagined it would be that obituary. The narrative goes back 3 years, explaining that his mother already knew about her son's illness and spent the rest of her life trying to find her missing brother. She had been ill for a long time, but had now left for a better place. The man reflects that he tried to give up on finding his younger brother, so he left Korea to enlist and serve in Africa. He thought he would have no reason to return to Korea. When his brother's body was found, few things were in his possession. When he opened the box, he found a photograph and wondered if it looked like a movie. Next to the photograph was a pocket watch, the same gift he had given his brother to wish him luck in his college entrance exam. There were a few things engraved on the watch. Then the flashback begins, showing the brother receiving the gift and saying that he really needed a watch, thinking it was much more stylish than a digital one. He asks his younger brother what he thought, but the brother asks what was engraved on it. He recognizes his name, JPW, but questions the meaning of CAW. The older brother is confused as his surname was Cha, and he didn't understand how Cha could be spelled with a C. He said he would complain to the manufacturer to correct it, but the younger brother said he didn't need to. He would keep the watch anyway, and if he needed to sign his name, he would do it as it was engraved. Returning to the present, the man realizes that the clock wasn't broken. Suddenly he heard a voice saying that one day his brother would have that diary in his hands, but that when that happened, he would have already left this world. He began to wonder if he was hallucinating, as there was nothing installed in the watch. The voice continued, saying that his brother was sorry, as he had been through a lot. The brother just wanted to get some medicine to cure their mother and thought he could come back quickly, but ended up leaving in another way. The story goes back to October 9th, 2013, when he received a strange message, the subject of which seemed too unusual to be spam. The message asked whether or not he wanted to take part in something. Normally, he would have ignored it, but with his mother ill in hospital, he decided to pay attention. From that day on, he started having strange dreams. On October 12th, 2013, he said that it definitely wasn't a dream. He was sure that it was real and that there were elves and dwarves in that place. It was a world where orcs, trolls, and dragon spirits roared, and at the center of it all was the Tower of the Sun God. They said that whoever overcame the obelisk's challenges would become a god, but everything he wanted was inside the tower in the form of an elixir. On October 28th, 2013, he formed a group with someone who thought like him, and they started climbing the tower. On November 9th, 2013, he decided to run away from home, believing that he would only be away for a few months. On December 1st, 2013, the name of his group was Ardia, and they were the best in every respect. But by September 7th, 2014, the pace of their achievements was slower than they had hoped, and it would probably take them more than a year to complete them. On November 11th, 2014, a conflict broke out with a high-level clan, which slowed down progress. On February 31st, 2015, they were unable to reach an agreement and went to war. At some point, an allied clan was destroyed. On March 4th, 2016, he had someone he loved. On September 19th, 2016, another war broke out. On January 2nd, 2017, the war was still going on, and everyone was exhausted. On July 6th, 2017, a traitor was discovered, causing discord in the clan. Everyone began to suspect each other. On July 1st, 2017, he began to feel his body getting heavier and heavier. On October 30th, half the clan members left him, and they were being defeated in the war. His body began to deteriorate. On November 1st, the woman he loved betrayed him, leaving him heartbroken, and his body began to rot. He mentions how much he missed Hyung, big brother. On February 1st, 2018, he was the only one left in Ardia and wondered where things started to go wrong. On February 28th, 2018, he finally got the elixir, but he was surrounded by enemies and couldn't send it home. At that moment, he realized that there was no one else by his side, but he knew he couldn't show weakness. He left those notes, sure that one day his brother would hear them and take the elixir back to his mother. He says that he dedicates that message to his brother, that one day he will see that diary, and he hopes that his brother will listen to those notes one day. At that moment, a system appears in front of him, informing him that the succession has begun. Suddenly, lights began to appear on his body. He wonders if that was mana, and if that was the power of the tower that the people from the other world possessed. He begins to remember his brother, visualizing memories, until the images are replaced by him covered in blood. The system then informs him that the awakening has been completed, but that the succession process is still incomplete. It says that to complete the succession, his body must be perfect, and the process is only 5% complete. The current condition is incomplete succession, with the body partially evolved and its nature discovered. His abilities have been added. The system asks him if he would like to register his player in the obelisk. He reflects that he now knows exactly what happened to his brother and who abandoned him to death. He also understands why his brother returned like that after 5 years. If this is the case, he will have to avenge his brother, following the rules of that world. He will do this with everyone involved. Looking at the system, he realized that it was called a status window and looked just like a game. After completing his awakening, his body would adjust, but his abilities were still too low. The system then reveals his nature, cold-blooded. This means that he will maintain an unwavering rationality in any situation and will be immune to any mind control or brainwashing. He reflects that his nature wasn't bad. The system continues, revealing his new ability, Draconic Vision Feat. This means that his dragon eyes can penetrate the truth and visualize the abilities of a person or object in advance. He remembers that his brother, Young-Hoo, found an ancient dragon called Kalatos and formed a contract with it on the 11th floor of the tower and wonders if that's what's left. The system mentions another ability, Strengthened Senses. His 5 senses have been drastically enhanced, and he believes that this is related to his nature. But what strikes him most is the last message, Clairvoyance. This was probably linked to the pocket watch he had found. He decides that everything is all right, and that he has to move on anyway. He feels that his brother wanted him to find the elixir and get out of there without further ado, but he knows it won't be possible to do things that way. While reflecting, he was in a cell phone conversation with someone. The person was asking what it all meant to Sergeant Cha and why he wanted to go out for dinner so suddenly. He also asked if something was wrong and if there was a problem. He apologized and hung up the phone. He then thinks that he has solved everything he needed to. He put his house up for sale, burnt his military uniform along with his old rucksack, bought a new rucksack, packed some clothes, food and knives, like the ones he used in the battalion, as well as a first aid kit. He wanted to get a gun or some explosives on the black market, but he knew that without a constant supply of bullets, this would just be another setback. He then wonders if the first round had already started a week ago, and if the players who started late received advantages according to how long they were behind. The closer someone got to overtaking first place, the more points they would accumulate. He also knew that there were hidden items that newcomers could take advantage of. Suddenly, a black aura appears in front of him. When the aura dissipates, a black door appears. He says that he will make sure that those on the other side of the world know who they are dealing with. From that moment on, he would be called Shad Young-Hoo. He enters the door and the system informs him that he has reached floor 0, where the tutorial begins. He opens his eyes and realizes that he has indeed entered that place, which was exactly the same as the one he saw in the notes. The tower has an entry test for players, who have the chance to become gods as they climb the tower. To do this, you have to prove that you're fit, which is the function of the tutorial. He comments that that place is also where the people who hurt Young-Hoo were, and asks his brother to wait a little longer, because he'll be there soon. He knows that in order to enter the tower, he needs to accumulate a lot of points and go through the tutorial. He's determined to get an overwhelming result, and will accept nothing less than first place. What's more, the hidden items are there, and he must collect as many as possible to evolve from his imperfect state. Before he starts climbing the tower, he needs to strengthen himself as much as possible. Suddenly, a voice appears announcing an unexpected visit. The voice says that it thought it wouldn't be able to find him, and was therefore about to leave. Just then, a goblin in a suit appears in front of him. The protagonist reflects on the situation and says that no matter how strong his heart is, if he continues to act like that, he will end up getting hurt. He suggests that the goblin put down the knife. The goblin replies that it's nice to meet you, and introduces himself as the floor manager and a guide called D. Balira. He comments that his meeting there was probably the work of fate, and asks if the protagonist won't at least say hello. The protagonist responds by saying that the advice of an administrator is something that people usually discard, but that he prefers to keep it in mind. D. Balira comments that it seems that, somehow, the protagonist already knows who they are, and thought he was a shy person, since he was wearing a mask over his face. The goblin goes on to say that, as the protagonist is already familiar with the system, it would be easy to talk to him. De Balira explains that the tutorial is divided into 7 different blocks, from A to G, each with its own unique atmosphere and tests. The protagonist's performance in completing these tests will determine their final score. All the scores will be added up, and a final result will be announced. The protagonist asks what the benefits of getting a high score are, and the goblin replies that the higher the score, the more rewards he will receive in the future. De Balira also mentions that the protagonist will have 30 days to complete the tutorial, but they can choose how to distribute this time between the blocks. They are already a week into the current round. The goblin asks if the protagonist would like to continue or start the next round. The protagonist reflects that the most advanced group must already be a long way away, making it impossible for a newcomer to catch up. The goblin suggests that, when trying to move from one block to another, the protagonist should form a group of 3 to 5 people. The protagonist, however, wonders if this means that he can get a higher score if he goes it alone. The goblin smiles and explains that the tower increases the player's strength according to their efforts. The greater their contributions, the more the score will be adjusted, so he doesn't need to worry about that. D. Balira thinks that players like the protagonist usually follow one of 2 paths. Either they blindly believe in their abilities and end up dying, or they become incredibly powerful. The goblin concludes that if the protagonist has understood everything, they could start the test immediately. The system announces that the 0 floor test is starting, the 0 test. The aim is to prove that the protagonist has what it takes to become a god and climb the tower. He needs to achieve a score within the time allowed, which is 549 hours and 37 minutes. As soon as the protagonist crosses a line on the floor, the system announces that he has entered Block A, where he must disarm or destroy all the traps on that floor. Suddenly, a trap is activated and cuts off his arm. He thinks that, although the diary had mentioned that there would be many traps, knowing this didn't help much, as he didn't know the location or the mechanism for activating the traps. He decides to stand closer to the wall to minimize the exposure of his body, but ends up being hit again. Now the protagonist is walking down the corridor, covered in blood, and the system informs him that extreme pain has overtaken his body, leaving him dazed. However, his cold-blooded nature is activated, and he remains calm, overcoming the stun. He also develops a tolerance to pain. He thinks he knew it would be dangerous, but he didn't expect it to be so much. If he carries on like this, he'll end up going mad. The protagonist removes the arrow from his arm and cauterizes the wound, but this stuns him again. His cold blood nature is activated once again, and he develops a tolerance to burns. He realizes that the arrows fire in a calculated manner, and that there was a very weak signal indicating the exact moment of firing. He concludes that he needs to hear the sound of the gears turning to identify where the arrows are coming from and where they are going. With his senses heightened, he listens to the sound of the gears and prepares to act at the right moment. The system announces that his hearing and touch have been strengthened, and the strengthened senses skill has been increased by 0.8%. The protagonist is finally able to detect the location of the arrows and reflects that the way he deals with them will directly influence his stats. Dodging blue arrows will increase his agility, blocking red arrows will increase his strength, and being hit by yellow arrows will increase his vitality. The more points he accumulates, the closer he gets to defining his class. But what bothers him most is that he hasn't yet managed to increase his MP. However, he says that if he can take advantage of this and quickly increase his stats, that would be great. The goblin comments that the more he observes the protagonist, the more interesting he becomes and feels that he is the first character of his kind. For some reason, the protagonist's eyes were more on that person who entered Block A than on the people in Block E. He says that this boy is certainly unique, and even if he qualifies, he will still have to face many dangers. However, if he manages to be as sensitive and overcome the rest, interesting events will emerge during that tutorial. Changing scenes, the system informs him that he has reached the endpoint with Strength 29, Agility 33, Vitality 30, and MP 21. He then notes that apart from MP, all his stats have increased significantly. Improving that much in just one day was extremely beneficial for him. He mentions that it wasn't just that, his physical strength, agility, endurance, and destructive power have also increased. Then he opens a door and the system informs him that the treatments for his injuries have begun. Suddenly, a golden light envelops his body, and he realizes that this was the place for the players to rest. Finally, he could breathe a little, but at that moment, he fainted and fell to the ground. When he opened his eyes, there was a hooded person in front of him, and he was asked to guess who it was. He gets scared and tries to figure out who the man is, knowing that his heightened senses ability was still activated, which makes him wonder how he didn't notice the stranger's presence. He then asks if the man was a mysterious merchant. The man responds with relief, saying that the protagonist has recognized him and that he loves him. The stranger introduces himself as the Merchant of the Passage, explaining that from time to time, merchants appear at the endpoints to provide players with what they need in exchange for payment, offering common items such as food, potions, and skill books, as well as rare artifacts. The merchant then asks if there is anything specific that the protagonist needs. Looking through the items on sale, he sees Medusa's poison, a golden goat's horn, and Tiamat's left eye, all extremely rare artifacts and inaccessible to players in a tutorial. The protagonist reflected that he was not yet at a level where he could depend on artifacts or skills, and that he should focus on physical training. After examining the items, he finds a reset ticket, which would allow him to return to the location of his choice. He asks the merchant how he could pay for these items, and the merchant replies that payment would be made from his stats. He would just have to pay the right amount, as merchants have a conscience about offering items at fair prices. The protagonist then thinks that a mineral water costing 2 strength points was really a theft of statistics. He comments that he would like to buy something specific, and the merchant asks what it would be. The protagonist then offers all the stats points he got in the block as payment to buy a ticket to restart Block A. The merchant asks if he was referring to a reset ticket, and the protagonist confirms it. The merchant comments that he is the first person to want to buy such a ticket, as people usually prefer to buy something that helps them advance to the next stage, rather than something that makes them do it all over again. The protagonist replies that this is exactly why he wanted the ticket. The merchant considers the protagonist to be a very interesting participant, and explains that using the ticket is incredibly simple. Just tear it in a place of your choice, and you'll be transported to the starting zone. Before leaving, the merchant says that he hopes to meet you again, and then disappears. The system warns him that all the points the protagonist has acquired have been taken as payment. He feels his strength leaving his body, and the system informs him that he has purchased 10 reset tickets for Block A. He tears up one of the tickets and returns to the beginning. The protagonist comments that he would now accumulate as many points as possible, and starts to do it all over again, thinking that this would be the last time he would do this part of the tutorial. By repeating the tutorial several times, he improved his senses, and synesthesia was now in his hands, along with the feat of draconic vision, an ability that allows him to partially use the eyes of the ancient dragon Kalatos. He recalls that when he used the eyes for the first time, he was impressed by the new perspective. The draconic vision feat eliminated all colors from his field of vision, leaving only a white background and black lines that formed the shapes of things. His brother named this phenomenon Jew. The system then informs him that he has reached the end of Block A. He then thinks that it took about 4 hours, and for something that took 34 hours the first time, that's a big improvement. He notices that his stats have improved a lot. His strength is now 51, agility 56, vitality 55, and MP remains 21. He comments that with these stats, it will be more than enough to avoid being destroyed by the other participants. The best players are probably already on their way to Block A, and if he takes too long, he won't be able to catch up with them. He says that now is the time for the competition to really begin. The system then informs him that he has just entered the boss's lounge in Block A. He thinks he's going to clear both Block A and Block B, and takes off running. Suddenly, some arrows are launched in his direction, but he manages to dodge them. He comments that the pace was faster than he expected, and the system warns him that his strength has increased by 1 point. He says he can't slow down there. Suddenly, a hole opens up in the ground, but he manages to jump in time, avoiding several spears that were at the bottom, which would surely kill him instantly. He then says he'll have to do something different, and with a leap, reaches the other side. The system informs him that his agility has increased by 1 point. In front of him, he sees a streak of fire but manages to cut it in half and crosses the path it opened. The system reports that due to his cold-blooded nature, he has developed resistance to burns, and the level of his heightened senses skill has risen by 15.6%. By dodging more obstacles, his agility has increased by another point. His vitality has also increased by a point, and his heightened senses skill has reached 16.9%. Suddenly, he receives a punch in the stomach, and wonders if it was one of those creatures that copies the players. It was a copper mannequin, which imitates the player's movements and actions perfectly, and attacks within a certain range. He remembers his brother mentioning these creatures, which are able to copy players' abilities and use them against them with equal force. If he manages to defeat them, he will be able to enter the boss room, but if not, it will be like having an iron ball attached to his leg. There are 2 ways to defeat them: by hitting their heads or impaling them. He then activates his dragon eyes and sees that the mannequin's weak point is in the center of its chest. The creature takes off towards him, but suddenly a person tells him that the thing was using a sensor to locate and attack them. He thinks that perhaps this is the person he sensed earlier, when his senses were heightened. He already knew that the mannequin moved according to its sensors, so he hits it in the back, causing it to explode. The person watching is surprised and comments that it seemed impossible. The protagonist comments that he barely managed to discover that the bronze mannequins move with sensors thanks to their heightened senses, something that ordinary players probably wouldn't be able to perceive. He wonders how that man knew that. The man asks what the protagonist is going to do with him. The protagonist thinks he looks like a very weak person. The man then asks what the protagonist's intentions are, and the protagonist replies that he has none, asking how he knew about the bronze mannequins moving with sensors. The man asks, "What are you talking about?" The protagonist, Young-hoo, replies that he was referring to the bronze mannequins moving with sensors and asks how he found out. The man replies that he saw the thread of mana surrounding the mannequin. Young-hoo realizes that the man can see mana, which means that he has an extremely high affinity with mana control, even among those who are able to control it. Young-hoo asks the man how he can see and control mana, showing an interest in learning. He thinks that if he can learn this technique, it will be very useful when he needs to control mana. Young-hoo says that of course, he didn't expect the man to teach for free, and notes that he seemed to have been stuck there for a long time. Young-hoo then offers to help him get out. The man seems surprised by the offer, and Young-hoo says, "If it sounds like that's not a bad deal, what do you think?" The man hesitates but replies that it isn't, asking the protagonist to wait. He asks if it was true that Young-hoo couldn't control his mana. The protagonist confirms, saying that he had no reason to lie. The man was confused, saying that it didn't make sense. He asks if Young-hoo was saying that it was possible to do what he did, without even controlling mana. The man reflects that normally, no matter how many physical attacks are unleashed, they wouldn't even make a scratch on the mannequin, but Young-hoo managed to obliterate it with just a few attacks. Even so, he claims that he can't control his mana. The man then asks who the protagonist is. He then decides to help Young-hoo, saying that his name is Yo, and asks how he can help him. Young-hoo replies that he will clear the way first, and asks Yo to stay right behind him and follow him. He asks why Yo was hiding like that. The protagonist comments that Yo's appearance was a disguise, and that he is probably 10 years old inside and out, and very short. He thinks that maybe Yo isn't a normal person. Yo replies that just because he's a child doesn't mean he'll tolerate certain things. The boy then says that he understands. Changing scene, our protagonist is eliminating some more bronze mannequins and comments that they're almost at Block B. He asks if Yo shouldn't start talking now that they're there. Yo replies that he doesn't know how Young-hoo will feel about it, but he was born with the ability to see mana. Young-hoo thinks that maybe it's a bloodline ability, and Yo confirms that it's something like that. He explains that, although it's rare, sometimes in another world there are cases where genes demonstrate a unique or supernatural ability, which is passed down from generation to generation through a bloodline. At a special moment, a descendant awakens this ability and does something great with it, passing it on to the next descendant in the future. Yo reveals that he is one of those cases, and that the ability he inherited allows him to feel, see, and touch mana, as if he had a natural affinity with it. That's how he discovered that the bronze mannequins had sensors. The protagonist wonders if Yo is similar to his brother. It is explained that Young-hoo's brother's nature is called perfect adaptation, allowing him to be compatible with everything, including mana. Unlike other people who experience difficulties when using mana, Young-hoo's brother felt no discomfort, as if he had recovered something old that he had lost. He controlled his mana masterfully, something that surprised his companions. Because of this characteristic, Young-hoo's brother was chosen by the ancient dragon Kalatos, and because he could communicate with everything, he was able to inherit the dragon's abilities, something that ordinary people would not be able to. Yo then comments that, technically, both he and Young-hoo's brother can be considered geniuses, but that he himself doesn't quite fit into that category. He explains that mana is like a river, while magic is like small streams or reservoirs that flow through it. The protagonist ponders this. The system then tells him that he has completed Block A as a solo player, an achievement considered extremely difficult. He receives 500 karma as a reward, as well as having his mana and vitality recovered, for a total of 800 karma. Young-hoo comments that the concept of karma is very important in the tower and is used as a currency between players. The administrator distributes karma as a reward, and he allows players to buy and sell goods. Each player's goal is to accumulate as much karma as possible. Although he has only finished Block A, he has already accumulated a lot of points, which would surprise other players. Young-hoo thinks that although he has achieved a lot, it is still not enough, and that he needs to achieve much more. The system then informs him that he has just entered Block B. At this moment, he sees many people in the hall, some sharpening their weapons and others badly injured, some even without limbs. People look at the protagonist and wonder what kind of mask he's wearing, and who that madman is. It's been a week since the tutorial began, and they wonder if there are any more participants. They also wonder if that man managed to clear the brutal path of Block A on his own. Young-hoo then asks Yo what he's doing there, if he's not going into Block B. The boy replies that he has finally managed to get out of there and meanwhile sees a group of people. The people feel uncomfortable in Yo's presence, and the boy becomes visibly irritated looking at them. The protagonist asks if that was his group, but the boy replies that they were, but that now they have nothing to do with him. Yo wonders where he stopped talking, and the protagonist remembers that he was talking about the river of mana. Young-hoo reflects that Yo knows a lot about mana, and, Although the information is difficult to understand, he has managed to grasp the basic concepts about mana and magic. He comments to the boy that he now has a good basic understanding of what magic is and asks what the easiest way to control it would be. Yo replies that he's not sure, since he's always been able to control mana naturally from the start, so it's hard to explain. Young-hoo says that he understands and that, at that moment, there was nothing more to be done. He comments that, after the tutorial is over, the boy will probably leave for the outside world, and so they say goodbye. Just then, however, someone approaches and says that he loves seeing the look on their faces, saying that people like them do great things when they work hard. He introduces himself as Bildit, an executive from the Orang Guild, and says he'll be waiting in the B block hall. If Young-hoo and Yo want to continue, they can go together. One of the men says he can't believe that Eridan would escort them. The other replies that, speaking of Eridan, they're referring to that unstoppable group that has completely taken over the tutorial. Switching scenes, they're fighting mannequins, and one of them comments that they're screwed, since they're not even scratching those guys. The man thinks that they really are in trouble, and if things continue like this, forget finishing the tutorial. They won't even make it out alive. Suddenly, he looks at Yo and thinks that Yo's ability is only good for analyzing the flow of mana, which isn't much help since he's only in the background. So he decides to do something. He ends up grabbing the boy and asks him what he's doing with him. So the man throws him into the middle of the mannequins and everyone else runs out. Yo wonders how they could have done this to him and all the way to the A block waiting room. He really thought he would have found some decent companions. Yo then asks what they want now and if they still have anything to say. The man who threw him asks how he managed to escape, and the boy replies that it really matters. He doesn't know what the man means by that. He just wanted them to get away from there. They all probably feel very uncomfortable seeing him there, which makes him want to vomit just looking at their faces. So he asks them to pretend they don't know each other until the tutorial is over. The guy asks for forgiveness and says he'll do anything to get the boy to forgive him for what happened earlier. In return, he asks Yo to keep what happened a secret. He doesn't know exactly what to say, but he asks them not to tell the others. He was begging for it, and everyone ends up bowing to him. The boy then tells them that he doesn't really know what they're talking about and just wants them to get out of his sight because he doesn't want to see the faces of any of them in his life. So he turns and leaves. The man thinks that things can't end this way. He has already told Bildit that Yo had sacrificed himself and that, if he tells the truth one day, he could end up losing the position he will receive in the Eridan Guild. He thinks it was very hard to abandon him the first time, but the second time won't be difficult at all. Luckily, they're in a secluded area with no one watching, so he's sure he can do it without anyone seeing. Besides, Bildit doesn't even know what Yo looks like, and he can lie by saying he had problems in the boss room. Just as that man draws his sword to attack Yo, our protagonist appears behind him. He says that in the tutorial, Eridan is a group directly associated with Blue Flower Island, and many people say that newcomers are selected from there. However, the people of Blue Flower Island are very sensitive, and therefore feel uncomfortable around people with a dark past. He comments that they couldn't even do what he did. The man asks who he is, and so our protagonist rips the guy's hand off. At the same time, they all pull their guns on our protagonist, who thinks that if things went his way, he would go peacefully to Block B. However, after learning that Yo has been betrayed by his teammates, this makes him very angry, and he is forced to get involved. It wasn't just because of that. It was because he saw the shape of someone else in Yo, since his younger brother had no choice but to be stabbed in the back by his own teammates. The men then wonder how long he was there and think that no one noticed him. Young Guiro says that if they have the courage to stab someone in the back, they should at least be prepared to lose a few limbs. The blonde guy then says how dare he do that with his hand, and that at that moment he's going to die. He tries to hit our protagonist with his sword, but he easily defends himself. Young-hoo asks him to keep trying and says he'll make sure that guy never walks again. The guys ask him what his problem is, since he has nothing to do with that boy. Why is he meddling? Young-hoo replies that they're doing what they want, so there's nothing to stop him from doing the same. He asks everyone to drop their weapons now, and they do. They ask him to let go of his friend Kane, but Young-hoo tells them they're all idiots. He ends up breaking that guy's arms, who faints with pain. The others say that it wasn't the deal, and at the same time Young-hoo hits another of them with a strong punch. All the others go after him, and a battle begins, but Young-hoo easily finishes them off. Yo is very impressed by our protagonist's abilities, and thinks he knew he was strong, but not that strong. Young-hoo then asks him why he's drooling like that, and asks him to have a good life, saying that from now on he should be very careful with people. Young-hoo turns and walks away. Yo thanks Young-hoo, who is his real name, and says that he's sure to become someone like him one day. Young-hoo asks Yo to visit the Florida garden in Prasia, as it will be very useful for him. Yo ends up being determined. Switching scenes, we see a guy with red hair who asks if his friend saw it. He asks his friend to wake up right now, and the person replies, "What is it this time? I can't even sleep in peace." The red-haired guy talks about what happened earlier, since those guys were all thinking they had been accepted by Eridan, but ended up being completely humiliated by one of them. The other replied that he'd expected it to happen after seeing how he was making himself look. He knew that one day they would get into trouble and get beaten up, but they weren't people who attracted attention anyway. The red-haired one says that even if they're beaten by just one person, it's still impressive. His friend is very impressed and asks if it's true that he was in Block A and that he seemed to be a solo player. He wonders if it's really true and if it's not too late for that. If it is true, he really is incredible. The red-haired one mentions that he defeated some people from Eridan, which probably means that those people in blue and white will be annoyed. The friend says that, to be honest, he's just a candidate, which is exactly why he's thinking about something. If he joins that guy, he'd be a solo player. That means he wouldn't have a relationship with anyone, and there wouldn't be anyone like him either. The other then says he's not too sure about that, since they might have to face those people in blue and white. The red-haired one asks him when he started worrying about it, and anyway asks him again if he wants to join. He tells his friend that it's a very bad hobby to have, but the guy replies that he doesn't care and asks if he's going or not. The green-haired man stands up, saying that he's going, knowing that he likes this more than he does. The system then warns you that the Block B test will now begin, and there are 4 passages in Block B. You have to choose one and defeat the monsters. We then see that there are 4 doors, 1 black, 1 red, 1 blue, and 1 gray. It is said that the passages have been made in such a way that the level increases according to the choice. The green-haired man says that his brother chose the blue door, the second one on the right, and that he decided to take it easy with his companions, choosing the easiest one compared to the last because Block A was incredibly difficult for him. However, after a long time, his brother discovered the secret of the tutorial and ended up regretting his decision because in Block B, the items you can get vary depending on the color of the door you choose. So he thinks he's going to choose the black door and that he needs to get Batory's vampiric dagger. So he opens that door, and the system warns him that he has entered the black path and must cross the pit and get to the other side safely. The Xianzhongsu well was created after a giant accidentally spilled some of the water he was carrying. The well is an uninhabitable place for living beings. He ends up kicking a stone into the water and comments that it was just as he imagined, that water really wasn't normal. Its density and pressure don't even compare to normal water, and an ordinary person would be crushed by it. He then activates his draconic eyes and ends up seeing a mark on the wall. When he touches that mark, a passage opens and the system informs him that he has found a secret area, discovering the Hall of Fire and Ice, as well as getting 300 karma. The system tells him that he has finally entered the dungeon. Young-Hoo comments that he thought it was white moss, which is found in caves and contains the spirit of the moon. You can get an intestinal infection without eating that moss, which doesn't taste very good. As he said, even though the black root is difficult, there are several ways of dealing with this difficulty. One of them is what to do with that white moss, which is a miracle drug that possesses the spirit of the moon. For this reason, many animals regard it as a reserve source of food. However, this moss is not compatible with the human diet. A person cannot extract the energy during digestion. Worse still, there are cases where the body rejects the moss, causing food poisoning. For this reason, some players who discover this dungeon try to avoid white moss. A secret that his brother later discovered was that there is a way to ingest that white moss using as an ingredient creatures such as insects and animals that consider white moss to be an alternative source of food. These creatures have evolved in a way that allows them to artificially emit heat into their bodies, making it possible to extract energy from the moon. This type of heat emission begins in the heart, acquiring the attributes of fire. Otherwise, white moss has properties that are close to those of ice, which would be attributes of water. If he manages to use both at the same time, the 2 different properties will work together to create a miracle remedy that will strengthen your bones and muscles. He then says that the human body is very fragile and can easily get sick, broken, or cut. However, there is a way to completely transform his body, making it stronger and easier to fight. To do this, he needs white moss and the heart of an animal, so he ends up facing a giant centipede. This monster is called the red centipede, which depends on white moss as a stable source of food. Although its eyes have atrophied due to life in a sea cave, its other senses are quite sharp, and sometimes it prefers to eat meat rather than moss. The system informs you that the fire-type monster has appeared, and that the secret mission is fire and ice. Inside the Hall of Fire and Ice, there are peculiar monsters that depend on white moss as a stable food source. If these monsters escape the dungeon, there's a chance that the ecosystem outside will become chaotic. The quest asks you to defeat as many monsters as possible, and the reward will vary according to the number of monsters defeated. Young-Hoo moves in on the red centipede and realizes that its skin is very tough. Normal attacks won't pierce it. The inner layer is extremely resistant, and even though his knife pierced the shell, it didn't penetrate deep enough. He concludes that it would be irrational to try to rip the heart out like that, Since there's no way for him to find out what the centipede's stamina level is and how deep the cave goes, he needs to clear the dungeon in a short period of time. He activates his draconic eyes again and sees the centipede's weak spot. He thinks he needs to strike at the right moment. The centipede lunges at him, and at that moment he jumps on top of it, hitting it in the back. However, he realizes that it also has an internal shell and ends up taking a blow and being thrown away. The system informs him that he has taken an extreme amount of damage and is now stunned. He has also suffered an internal injury, with bodily fluids from the red centipede entering his bloodstream, and is now poisoned. The damage is described as 4 broken bones, 2 spinal fractures, and a ruptured vein in his left thigh. The system then says that his cold-blooded nature will keep him calm, and he is no longer in a state of shock. He has developed shock tolerance and is no longer poisoned, also acquiring the skill of physical resistance. As someone who can't lose his cool in any situation, he realizes that he has an iron will and persistence, learning the skill called will to fight. So he goes after the centipede again and thinks that there is only one place above the joint where the rigid shell is not present, the abdomen. He stabs the red centipede in the abdomen and finally manages to defeat it. The system then informs him that he has safely eliminated the red centipede and that he has defeated something rare, earning him additional rewards. He takes off his mask and eats the white moss. He then eats a piece of meat from the red centipede. Changing scenes, Build-It wonders what happened to those two, thinking that they got in his way as soon as he left. He thought he had found some good recruits, but it seems the deal was off. He comments that that guy had the nerve to make a mess knowing he was under Oranguidan's protection, which means he really underestimates them. He asks if it was someone wearing a mask, and the man says yes. Build-It then thinks that he will have to go after this person from now on. Returning to our protagonist, the system informs him that he has ingested the heart of the red centipede and energized himself with white moss, promoting a secret bonus effect. His broken bones are healed and stronger than before, and his muscles are preparing to become more resilient. The number of monsters hunted is 1, and he has obtained the guide to the heart of fire and the summit of ice. He feels relieved after all this, and says that a secret relic strengthens his body and muscles. He reflects that the heart of fire and the summit of ice are reachable, even though he has only progressed 1.5% in the mission. The frequency with which his body recovers from fatigue is proportional to the frequency with which it strengthens. Compared to cleaning the boss room, he never thought he would gain more status by hunting a red centipede. The fact that he has low magical power worries him, and he wonders if there's anything he can do about it now. Depending on his abilities, he'll have to deal with it for now. But he knows that there will be several situations in the future that will require the use of mana. The more experienced he becomes, the harder it will be to improve. He concludes that the most important thing is his ascension, which is not yet complete. The dragon's body, the shock, is part of the body, so it has a special quality. To fully accept the power that comes from the dragon, mana would be essential, so he decides to pay attention to that for now, but thinking about it doesn't mean that the solution will appear. It then says that the physical resistance effect is the best response to external impacts. The system then talks about physical resistance. It is Class A, with an efficiency of 7.2%. Resistance to physical attacks is increased, and high resistance to physical effects can appear simultaneously. He mentions that this ability minimizes impact and relieves pain, and that his cold-blooded nature allows him to remain conscious during training. However, after suffering unbearable pain several times, it becomes difficult to stay conscious and endure it. If he uses this skill correctly, he will be able to avoid situations like the one he faced in the future. High resistance against poisoning, burns, freezing, paralysis, hallucinations, and curses is also very useful. He hasn't mastered it completely yet, but it's definitely a very useful skill that can help his fighting style. He then says that the next skill will speed up his thinking. The system tells him that it's will to fight, Class 1, with an efficiency of 3.2%. Having unwavering endurance with a strong spirit in any combat situation is a fighting spirit that burns inside him. In battle, he is able to make decisions quickly, thanks to accelerated thinking. He says that this skill is the most important of all. Being able to make decisions quickly in difficult situations can be the key to survival, just as it can be the cause of death. He recalls that even the fight against the Redhorn was only won thanks to this skill. The classes that both skills received aren't too bad, as acquiring a lot during a tutorial isn't an easy thing to do. He then put his mask back on and began to explore the cave, defeating some infrasonic bats. The number of monsters defeated was already 147, and he thought he was starting to get used to it all. He removes the teeth and nails of the infrasonic bats and mixes the white moss with the extremely poisonous blood of the red centipede to a certain level to prepare a potion. If he pours this potion over the teeth and nails of the infrasonic bats, they will turn into a powder with fiery attributes, and if set on fire, will result in a huge explosion. He collects the powder and says that the next thing he has to do is right in front of him, an army of blue ants. They grow about 30 centimeters to 1 meter in size, with the queen in the center, and hundreds of ants join together to form their own society. He thinks that the characteristic of ant society is that the workers give their lives to protect the anthill, and he must fight off hundreds of ants coming at him at once. He comments that the problem is that the room behind there has Batory's vampiric dagger. The system explains that the vampire monarch was one of the monarchs who died a long time ago, and that she was known for sucking the life force out of others to make herself stronger. If she continued in this way, she would also steal their abilities, which would cause immense devastation. Players and clans feel terrible pain at the thought of the damage they have suffered from it, and the lower the number of the artifact, the better it is. Because this dagger is of a certain caliber, its number is extremely low, at 352. It's a 3-digit number, and as it's in the 300 range, it's a very high-level artifact, as well as being a unique item in the entire tower, which only exists in the tutorial. He thinks he must never miss this opportunity. If he can't attack the ants head-on, he'll use a trick. He throws that fire powder he has prepared, and then shoots an arrow, launching it in the direction of that powder, and causing a huge explosion in the ants. The system reports that he blew up the ant tunnel, and 217 ants from the Blue Army died in the explosion, while 89 were burned. Additional karma will be provided. He then goes off to kill the rest that survived. He comments that among those who died were baby ants and eggs that were about to hatch, but there are still many ants left. He decides to deal with them after taking Batory's vampiric dagger, as it represents an immediate danger. Just then, an ant much larger than the others appeared in front of him. The system tells him that the boss is here, the queen of the Blue Ant Army. The queen then starts attacking our protagonist. He tells her that there must be a door somewhere inside that anthill. After searching for a while, he finally finds the door and quickly cuts off one of its legs, running towards it. When he opens the door, the system informs him that he has entered the sanctuary of the vampire monarch. He then thinks that this is the vampire monarch's precious weapon, the vampire dagger. The system tells him that it is Batory's vampiric dagger, number 352, a type of one-handed weapon and a unique class. Its description says that it is the precious weapon of the vampire monarch and has the power to suck the life force out of the opponent. He smiles and says he's finally found it. Batory's vampiric dagger is a secret relic that will substantially reduce the distance between him and the vanguard. He then says that, in general, apart from its impressive power, even if it only causes the opponent to bleed, thanks to the blood mark option, the dagger performs better than average. However, the real value of this artifact lies in the dagger's last option, which is currently sealed. He ends up taking the dagger from the statue, and suddenly, a black aura rises up his arm. He thinks that Batory's dagger chooses its bearer, and if it doesn't choose you, it's said that your mind will be consumed by it. He wonders if the players who have just entered the tutorial are able to control the vampiric dagger. His brother was able to discover through a lot of research with the new players that they could control the vampire dagger, and if anyone saw him doing it, they would say that he really was crazy. He then takes the dagger and pierces his other hand, claiming that Batory's vampiric dagger was actually the name of an incredibly difficult skill to master. The vampire monarch was so greedy that she didn't want to pass on her precious weapon to anyone. Even after she died, she ended up sealing the true form of her skill in the daga and leaving it in the world. The system then informs her that the seal has been broken. It says that only now that the seal has been broken, a creature appears in her hand in the form of an aura. The system says that Batory's vampiric dagger, in its true form, is number 66. With 0.0% proficiency. The description says that it is the true form of the vampire monarch's precious weapon and that it devours her opponent's life force and their souls. He comments that this was actually the vampiric dagger. The system then talks about the blood mark. When you deliver a fatal blow, the target will suffer bleeding that will reduce their mana and energy. The target will also receive additional damage over time. The damage received will be part of the initial damage. He says that this is a unique skill that even the most advanced in the tower cannot easily master. The system then talks about the authority of the vampire monarch. The target's life force is sucked out completely, and a portion of the target's abilities is also stolen if that ability is completely mastered. With a physical probability of H, there is a chance of stealing a skill from the target. After reading all this, he smiles sincerely and says that he thinks he'll take whatever he wants now. He starts killing all those ants, and after defeating them, the system informs him that the target's life force is being extracted and that Batory's vampiric dagger skill has risen to 1.1%. He then begins to absorb various ants, gaining strength and energy points. After a while, the system informs him that he has killed the boss, the queen of the Blue Ant Army, and that additional karma will be provided. He has received 300 karma, and the fighting spirit of the Blue Ant Army has diminished. The ant tunnel is crumbling fast. Changing scenes, the two who appeared earlier, one with red hair, asks him if he's sure that was the right place. The other replies that that's what he's been saying all along, and that, if he doesn't believe him, they should go back. The red-haired one then asks if they should do it, and why approaching him was so difficult. But anyway, that guy ended up killing a lot of creatures without rest, and it's really quite incredible. He wonders how he managed to get so strong so quickly and also thinks that the monsters wouldn't suddenly become weak. The green-haired one then comments that it's a bit funny to say this after seeing all that, but what he faced before was undoubtedly stronger, if not stronger, than what he was facing now, and that they definitely weren't weaker than those. Repeatedly, he ends up telling Hyung to look straight ahead. Hyung says he already knew and doesn't think it's something they can ignore. He says that it was an energy drain and wonders how he found something like that, since they searched endlessly and found nothing of the sort. He asks if there's a secret item in that place and thinks that not only did he soil that A block, but he also picked up an artifact or skill from a secret relic. Someone like him is incredibly hard to find. Information about him will probably spread soon, and rumors will start circulating throughout the tutorial. If this happens, several clans will try to recruit him, and they need to convince him to join them as soon as possible before all this can happen. Suddenly, they see several blue ants running around. The system then tells our protagonist that he has eliminated the brown-scaled salamander, and that the number of monsters eliminated is 1,000. He has completed all the requirements for the mission and collected all the pieces for the Heart of Fire and the Summit of Ice. And the Heart of Fire and the Ridge of Ice begin to settle into his body, and his body begins to change. He receives a new body called Reinforced Anatomy. He then says that, thanks to Batory's vampiric dagger, he will be able to suck the life force out of monsters. The number of his abilities has increased dramatically to a point where they don't compare to what they were before, especially the new ability called Reinforced Anatomy. The system then explains what the nature of the Reinforced Anatomy is. The heart is covered in the energy of the Heart of Fire, while the person's entire body is enveloped in the energy of the Ridge of Ice. As the attributes of fire and ice merge, the person receives immunity and resistance, as well as a reduction in the accumulation of fatigue. He then thinks that the Reinforced Anatomy hardens his body and reduces his fatigue. The ability to self-heal is especially attractive, as it significantly reduces injuries, even in difficult situations. However, there is a different reason why he needs this nature. The system says that the body's development has been confirmed. The receptacle is strong enough and the previous ascent is interrupted, but will progress. Now, his current process is at 21.3%, and the state has changed from incomplete dragon body to immature dragon body. He comments that, in order to complete his ascension, he needs a receptacle that is strong enough and that Reinforced Anatomy is an essential part of completing it. The system then tells him that his rank in the tutorial has been updated and asks him if he would like to register his name in the ranking. He turns it down, saying that registering his name wouldn't do him any good and would only attract attention from the higher ranks. He sees that his rank is 281 and comments that it's good that it's gone up, but it's still a long way from the high ranks, such as Idora, Funi, and Kan. He wonders what those people were doing there, and if it really wasn't right. He realizes that he needs to pick up the pace and keep moving forward. Suddenly, he feels someone approaching and wonders if it's a stranger, since he hasn't sensed any other players during the time he's been there. He wonders if those people followed him, especially the ones he bumped into while helping Yolan. He wonders if they were coming after him for revenge, which would really be a problem. When he finally sees someone, he throws a dagger in their direction, but the Hyung ends up protecting his friend and asks the protagonist what that was all about. He then asks if they are from Darguidan. Hyung asks why he's saying Darangdan, and he replies that it's because they were following him. The guy says that even if they are Darridans, it doesn't make sense to attack them out of the blue. Young-hoo then argues that if they really were following him, even though they had nothing to do with him, he doesn't think they came with good intentions. Hyung apologizes, saying that they hadn't really thought about it. The protagonist asks what the reason was for them following him, and Hyung says that's exactly what it was. They wanted him to join their group. A colleague interrupts, saying that he should stop doing that because it's too embarrassing. Young-hoo thinks about the situation and decides to walk away, but the guy asks where he's going since he hasn't finished talking to him. Young-hoo asks what he had to say, and the guy says that he still hasn't answered what he wanted, that he was saying he should join their group. However, Young-hoo replies that this is impossible, as he doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't feel that forming a group with them would benefit him at all. The Hyung Gito asks if he doesn't know who he is, and Young-hoo says no. Hyung Ito is surprised by this, asking how he doesn't know who he is, since he's the biggest star of the tutorial. His partner comments that, rather, Hyung is very selfish and a bit mean, being a snob, so it can be difficult and tiresome to talk to him. Even so, he's not a bad person and asks people to understand his case. He introduces himself, saying that his name is Doily, and that this stupid rung over there was called C. The protagonist thinks it's Doily and Can, and sees that his rank is 011, the third in the tutorial. Doily says that he feels very embarrassed talking like that, and even though it seems a bit suspicious to the protagonist, because they are there when they should actually be in Block A, Young-hoo says that he will believe that they are Kane and Doily. Doily is impressed by this, asking if he's serious. Young-hoo has activated his dragon eyes and says that he discovered this recently while examining living beings with the dexterity of dragon vision. Those with more positive thoughts tend to have a lighter coloring, while those with negative thoughts have a darker coloring. He notices that both Kane and Doily are light-colored, which means they are telling the truth. However, he wonders why players like them, who should be completing challenges on the blocks and accumulating karma, have returned to an area they've already cleared and followed someone like him. Doily asks if he's ever had a team or clan, and Young-hoo says no. Doily says that's a good thing, as there's an artifact in the block that they're keeping an eye on. However, to get it, they need a group of 3 or 4 people. Young-hoo then asks if they couldn't just take anyone from the block. Doily says that the players in the block are already in guilds or groups, and the protagonist thinks that it was difficult to judge the skill in Block A. So that's why they waited in the lobby of Block B and ended up heading towards it, in order to solarize Block A and crush Kane's group. That must have caught their attention, and they must have thought that he would attract attention like that. He then asks them if they're saying that an artifact that even the 2 of them can't get as a team means that they're looking for someone who can help them, right? Then Doily says that's exactly what it was, but he can't explain it any further than that. The protagonist thinks that it seems they were looking for the Crown of Argon, and that his brother and his team, Artia, stumbled across this secret relic by chance. He heard that the lair's ruler, the Lizard King Argon, was very difficult to deal with during raids because of his explosive temper, and the reward Argon gives is the Crown of Argon, which gives the bearer the option of increasing their command presence. That's something he doesn't really need. Besides, his brother was betrayed by the friends he trusted, so inside that tower, it was every man for himself, and if you weren't careful, it would be impossible not to be attacked from behind. And in a forest as violent as that, there's no point in having companions or group members. Even if you had 1 or 2 companions, it was enough for them not to become a burden, and for you to be able to discard them as soon as the going got tough. Doily then said that his reward wouldn't be small, and if there was something he wanted, they could pay for it. She asked him what he thought of that, since he liked to think that the offer wasn't bad. Jae-han thinks that, even if he's not excited about it, Aquila is a secret relic, and what it contributes is still considerable. He definitely won't lose out if he wins something of this level. He then says that it sounds good, but he has one condition about it. Doily asks what it is, and he says that the artifact they said they need, he wants everything except them. They end up agreeing that this wouldn't be a problem, however. He should prove his worth. Khan ends up holding out his hand to him, saying that meeting him like this should have been fate anyway, and they should just finish the introductions. Young-hoo then thinks that this was a war camp and there's no need to speak his real name, so he needs a name, actually a code name. He uses the code name of Kane, and now his name is Kane. Changing the scene, the system says that he cleared the black route as a solo player and also conquered something that is not easily done. The added karma will be provided, and he has also cleared the Kane block as a solo player and then the D block. After killing a few goblins, Kan is left wondering what exactly he was seeing at that moment. He wonders if that guy really was someone who had only been in B block for a short time, and how he could have improved so quickly. As soon as he opens the door, all his statuses are restored, and he has just entered the block. Kan then says that he was feeling suffocated in there, and Doily says that it's a no-no to go there, as it was a perfect place to sleep, very dark. It is said that the tutorial is separated into 2 large areas, the interior and the exterior. The interior is the place where those who enter the tutorial begin to see the skills and develop the skills that are missing in blocks A to D. The exterior is where they can demonstrate the skills they have developed in the interior, thus proving their worth in the block. The system then tells him that he's about to start the block challenge, and he's been given a token. He is told that there are tokens hidden throughout the block that can be transferred or exchanged with other players, and to prove his worth, he will have to collect 99 of them. Khan then says that every time he sees those tokens, he gets disgusted. He thinks that this basically says that it's okay to steal or even kill someone to get the tokens, since the system has said that the tokens can be transferred or exchanged. He thinks that finding 98 other tokens will be very difficult. However, it's much easier easier to steal them from other players and get to 99 tokens. It's already clear which option the players will decide to use, and because of this, his brother said he also had difficulty. Thinking about it, he then realizes that Khan didn't seem very interested in the tokens. He probably just picked up several of them in Block B to finish quickly, or he may have already collected all 99. Khan then tells him that he's been given his challenge and that they need to get going. He asks if there isn't a secret relic in the block and if they should hurry to find it first, so they can go after the tokens. Khan agrees, but says it's too far and will take a while. The block has a larger area than all the other areas put together, and as a result, each area has its own topography, landmarks, and environments, creating a unique ecosystem. To the east, it is arid, with rocky mountains that act as a barrier. To the west, there is a calm flowing river, and to the south, there are several hills, but heading north, the forest gets much denser, and at the end of it is a swamp. That's why each area has a variety of monsters. Goblins and other small monsters, such as kobolds, form villages around the forest. Suddenly, the scene shifts to that Eridan member. He then asks if the asshole who destroyed Ken's group was hanging out with Kane and Doily, and why he was hanging out with them. They weren't supposed to be on the block. Byton says that they haven't gotten any information on this either, so they're still in the middle of an investigation. However, information has reached him that those two weren't seen in the block, and a witness has reported that two men fitting their description were seen in the B block hall. He then asks his informant how he only found out about something so important now. The informant replies that they didn't think they would be on the initial levels, so even if people stayed with them, they hadn't suspected it. The guy then asks what was going on at that moment. That meant those two were watching him. The informant replies that that's exactly what they were assuming. Kirito thinks that, as expected, they've found someone who can help them and says that Kane and Doily are miserable, leaving that masked bastard alone, knowing that he's caused trouble. This kind of behavior is clearly meant to denigrate Eridan, but not only that, Blue Flower Island as a whole. When he says this to his henchmen, he says that everyone is waiting outside, and the leader says that they're going after that masked guy. Moving on to our protagonist, he thinks he's come so far, and that time really does fly. Maybe that's why he's constantly running, and why he hasn't had any rest. He says that the skies of Africa were just like that place, and that kid, Young Hoo, used to love that kind of silence. Unlike the other players, Kane and Doily are always in high spirits. At the same time, their every move is full of confidence. These two have a free spirit that most players don't normally possess. It's as if this lifestyle has always been normal for them, and they comfortably accept the circumstances they must face. He says that they really are quite an interesting duo where they come from. What's more, occasionally, when the two of them show off their teamwork in fights, it amazes him, because it doesn't look like they've practiced before. He would say that Kane is a muscle and does the leading, while Doily stays behind as the brains of the operation, analyzing the situation and the opponents, who can attack them in several different ways depending on the situation they are facing. But whatever the case, the two seem so comfortable with each other that it makes no difference. Their teamwork isn't something you create in a day or two. It took at least 5 years, and that kind of synergy requires perhaps a little more than 10 years to develop. It's difficult even for biological siblings to work together that well. Those two freely sacrifice themselves for each other, something that can't be done without considerable faith in the other person. He then wonders how he would classify their relationship and isn't sure if they are brothers or not. It's beyond his comprehension at that moment to imagine how individuals with this level of skill and prestigious past can be so bonded and endure all this work. However, he says that one thing is certain: they seem to get on very well. He doesn't think he was trying to find out exactly what kind of relationship they have, or even to mix with them. It's just that when he looks at them, he has a memory of a certain person, and it seems that the darker it gets, the more sentimental he gets. Even though he tries to get rid of useless thoughts, he fears that he'll remember more irrelevant things. Suddenly, he realizes that the two of them have just gotten up. Kane asks what happened to them, since there was still some time before they had to change shifts. Kane asks how they can sleep with so much noise around them. Doily then asks how long he's going to leave those guys like that, and Kane says that it's complicated to deal with them now. He'd only get rid of them if they got too close. Anyway, he apologizes for not taking care of it earlier, since it seems the noise woke them up. Doily then says that it's always a problem, and that maybe it's because he hasn't exercised for a while, and his body was a bit tense. Maybe he can stretch in the moonlight. Doily says that he was also asking because he was curious. Did those guys come because they know he was there, or because they know they weren't there? Kane asks if it matters. What matters, in fact, is that they dared to draw their swords in front of him. He then hits one person with his sword, and they wonder how he knew they were there. After that, he goes around hitting those guys one by one. Then it's said that he has the Insect Tamer class, which controls flies and other insects with little intelligence. It's complicated and difficult, so those insects were eating those guys' flesh. Kane thinks these guys are really stupid. From so many places, they went straight there. Frank and his gang are said to be some of the most active thugs on the block, and they clearly love this kind of work. Under the guise of collecting tokens, they steal the victim's artifacts and all their belongings. Taking advantage of the players with the excuse of collecting their tokens, they also steal all their artifacts. The artifacts are divided among them to increase their fighting skills, while the tokens could be sold to higher ranks for a high price. What's more, some places demanded live players, whether as slave players, women of life, cattle, or even lab rats. And who wouldn't be interested in that kind of extremely lucrative work? A high-ranking teammate of Kane and Doily. He says that nobody knows how many tokens he's collected and how many artifacts he's going to get from both of them. He then prepares to stab our protagonist in the back. Just then, however, he disappears and appears behind them, stabbing him in the back. Everyone then wonders what the fuck just happened and how such a thing was possible. So his henchmen set out to attack Kane, who ends up finishing them all off without any difficulty. The remaining ones run away, but he goes after them and manages to kill them too. Then he says that he had 81 tokens in total and that he got them easily. Dunnington comments that it's been a while since the newcomers entered the block, and this must have been what was left after they sold most of it. More than 1,000 people on that block are looking for tokens and fighting over them. They had all this because they were just bandits. Most players manage to collect at least 10 tokens at most. Kane says that the rich get richer and the poor end up broke. Doily agrees, saying that's exactly what it was. Then it is said that the block uses the winner-takes-all method. The minority, who are strong players, take the chips from the majority, who are weak. The weak have no choice but to drop their chips in order to survive, even if they manage to hide some of them. In the end, they are extorted more and more, and no matter what they do, the strong can just sit back and collect chips quickly. On the other hand, the weak will always be short of chips because of this. The chasm separates the best players from the rest. The Doily then tells them that in any case, they should collect as many tokens as they can, because they are used to get karma, as well as to buy items in the mysterious market. All those tokens are his, since they didn't pay him up front for the deal, so he was supposed to take them as an advance. Kane then asks if he and Kane need karma. Doily, smiling, asks if he's really worried about them, and they say they have enough for each of them. Kane says it was fine, then thinks it was easier than he expected. The block is the last place for him to gain a large amount of karma, and that man could appear there too, increasing his magical power significantly, so he'll be able to complete the succession process. Soon after, they will kill the king of the lizard men, and he must prepare to kill that man. Changing the scene, Kane says that the next opponent they're going to face is very strong, and that they need to make some preparations before the fight against him. Suddenly then, Doily ends up throwing his insects into that fire, and Kane says that it was really impressive. They are called flame insects, and when they meet their natural enemy, they burn along with it. Doily then says that the tower was full of wonderful insects. Kane thinks that there are many things he still doesn't know about that tower. Changing scene again, they were killing some lizard men. Kane asks what he was doing at the time, and he says he was extracting their eyeballs. The eyeballs of lizard men are extremely useful for making artifacts with certain effects. The name of that artifact was based on a giant who was said to have 100 arms and 1 eye, and he needs the eyes to forge the Giga eyes. Suddenly, Doily senses the presence of something, and Kane says that yes, there does seem to be someone in front of them. They then find footprints and a trail of blood. Kane says that the blood was still fresh, and it could have been around 5 or 6 hours ago. It is said that the hidden area is literally hidden, and is only valuable if it is hidden. It has the function of encouraging the players to stay focused, so as not to give up. Doily then wonders if those people managed it. The areas hidden in the tutorial will never be repeated in the same block. For Kane and Doily, who need Argon's crown, that would be a huge loss. Kane then says that there are no footprints, only going, but not returning. It seems that the people who went there are looking for Argon's hiding place. Kane then asks what he means by that, and Kane tells him to look at it, as it's a mark of something heavy being dragged on the ground. That must be the player's body, and he thinks the lizard men used him as bait to lure them there. Kane then asks what that meant, and Kane replies that he has no idea. It is said that monsters are always prey, and there are cases where monsters capture players and make them prey. For the monsters, this place is their home, and they know the environment better than the players. Of course, there would be traps there, and it seems that this was related to that bait. Kane says he feels very uncomfortable, but he can't hold it in like that. Kane thinks you thought he was naive, but he manages to stay calm when necessary. Suddenly then, he is surprised by Doily's expression. Kane tells Kane that they haven't talked about that place yet, and he says that the place was called Argon's Den. Kane thinks he was still pretending he didn't know anything until now. Khan then asks if Argon was the commander of that lizard man they met earlier. So Argon was the boss and the leader of everyone, a king. Kane says it was something like that, and he's there at that moment. Kane then says that he seemed very strong, and Kane says that normally it would be impossible to kill him, even working together. Kane says that even so, they are there with him. Kane then says that's another story, but it will still be very difficult. There's also a boss inside that lair, and that was the real problem. No matter how hard they tried, killing 2 bosses with just 3 of them was impossible. They would just die in vain in that place. Khan then asks what his plan is, and Kane says it's to steal the male who stays outside the lair while the female stays inside. While he's distracting the male, he can distract the female. Then Doily will steal the crown that's on her head, and they'll escape from that place, since no one would be able to kill her alone. He just needed to keep her busy. Khan then says that he understands the mission, and thinks that he used to carry out tasks like this on the African battlefield. This is no different from that moment. There's just one difference. Before, he was a soldier who was being commanded by his superior, but now he looks like a mercenary driven by money. They then say they're going to start now, and the system informs him that he has entered a secret area, the Argon Den. He gains 500 karma. The lizards on guard eventually see that they are human. At that moment, the secret boss, Argon, the king of the lizards, appears and asks how the humans dare to enter his territory. That was unforgivable. The system appears again, talking about the secret mission, the king of the lizard men. Explanation of the block. 5 kings rule the forest. Argon is the king of the lizard men who rules the northern swamp. Objective: kill Argon, king of the lizard men, and all his subordinates. Reward: Argon's crown, a blue scimitar, and dominion over the lair. Kento thinks that he has never felt so much pressure in his life and that he hasn't felt anything like it since the first time he entered the tutorial. He says that it felt a lot like the fear he felt when he was sent to the war zone in Africa for the first time. For that monster, that feeling was new to him, so he starts to fight the lizard man. Just then, however, Kane steps in front of him and intervenes. The lizard man then told him not to interfere as he was no match for him. Kane apologizes but says he's not what he used to be, and so the two begin to fight. The lizard man asks him to stop running. Meanwhile, Doily and Kane were entering the lair. When they enter, they end up killing other lizard guards. Suddenly, they find some humans trapped and also several skulls lying on the ground. The humans were begging for their lives. Kane remembers the footprints of players he found at the entrance earlier, so that's where the players were thrown by those monsters. In other words, that place was used as a food depot to feed their people. Kenton says that they wasted time saving them there and that they wouldn't have much time to get their crown back now. Doily then asks how he wasn't irritated by the situation, and Kane asks, "What do you mean, irritated?" Doily asks how he manages to stay calm after seeing all that, and Kane thinks Doily looks like a child. Doily then says that he's human too, and wouldn't be human if he didn't get angry after seeing that. So how can he stay calm? Khan then says that they've already saved them, but Kane is in danger and asks him not to forget that Kane is fighting Argon right now. He can't face Argon alone, and the longer they stay there, the worse it will be for him. He was supposed to calm down and keep his priority, but if he still wants to act on his own opinion, then he'll have to cooperate with that plan. Doily apologizes, saying that he wasn't thinking straight, and says that they should continue, since Kane was waiting for them outside. However, Kane stops to think for a moment. He reflects that the reason Argon created a human larder was to feed his people. So if that's the case, why not use the opposite? He asks Doily to wait a while, as he's just had a great idea and could change the plan a little. If all goes well, they could also save those people who were trapped in there. Khan then asks if he could summon the flame bugs he called last night, as they would be essential to this plan. Meanwhile, the lizard queen was very angry, saying that she needed to see her babies, and that those miserable humans were there to steal her babies. Suddenly, Kane appears in front of her and asks if she likes fireworks. She asks what he's talking about. At this point, he ends up throwing it at her cubs, and the moment she hits that bag, dust comes out of it. He thinks it was gunpowder that he made from the monsters in the ice and fire dungeon. He then orders Doily to quickly send the fireflies into the powder, causing a huge explosion there. With this distraction, Kane ends up taking one of her babies, which makes her very angry. Kane then says that they threatened to save humans, as if they were nothing but cattle, and that she should know that it could happen to her too. She asks him to remove his hands, but when she tries to approach him, her body is blown up again, and so she ends up dying. The system then informs him that he has killed Boss Tegan, the queen of the lizard men, and that additional karma will be provided. The lizard men are demoralized, and the monsters in Argon's lair have suffered the effects of the panic. Kane then says that monsters and humans will always kill each other. He asks Doyle to take the crown, and they must hurry to find Can outside. Doyle takes the crown, saying that they have finally achieved this. Just then, the Lizard King and Can arrive on the scene. The Lizard King is very sad and cries over the death of his wife, saying that he will take revenge on her and their children. He then devours his wife's body, and the system informs him that Chief Argon, king of the lizard men, has used the predator ability. Argon successfully absorbed the power of Tegan, the queen of the lizard men. The mutation was in process, and the second phase was about to begin. Cain thought that this was very bad. Argan's body was undergoing a mutation. He reflected that, even if Argan was smaller and weaker than Tegan, she was a boss for a reason, and her main ability was the heat wave. If he had taken a millisecond, he would have been disintegrated, and the second phase was very dangerous indeed. He has to do something, otherwise he'll die out there. Suddenly the insect asks Cain if he's listening, and Cain asks if it's Doyle talking to him. Doyle replies that it's a relief, and that he didn't think it would work so well. He then asks Cain if he has some kind of plan. Cain asks if he can tell Doyle the plan, who says yes, if it's to deliver a message. Doyle then tells him the plan, and Argan is completely furious, saying he's going to find them and kill them. Just then, Cain appears in front of him and asks him to try if he can. So Argan lunges at Cain, but Cain activates his dragon eyes, defending himself and breaking Argan's sword. He says that now is the right time. Just then, Cain appears and strikes a blow at Argan. Doyle then sends some insects at him, causing him to explode. Cain thinks that if the three of them take on Argan at the same time, they'll leave the monster with no stamina left. However, if they lose focus for just a second, they could end up dead. He needs to stay calm. He realizes that Argan is going to use his heat wave again and ends up hitting him with the dagger, blowing him out of the back. They realize that Argan is starting to get tired. Cain says this is it and hits the Lizard King in the ankle. He then puts his hand on the back of Argan's head and tells him to absorb it. The system informs him that Batory's vampiric dagger has had its efficiency increased to 54%, and he has absorbed that monster's vitality and energy, setting it on fire immediately. The system then says that he has killed the second boss, Argan, the king of the lizard men, and that additional karma will be earned based on his contribution. Batory's vampire dagger extracted the target's energy, and a portion of the target's ability was successfully stolen. He acquired the heat wave ability. The system went on to say that the proficiency of Batory's vampire dagger was too low, and that the acquired skill would be modified. The heat wave skill was transformed into flame infusion. The description was, this skill is a fragmented form of the Lizard King's innate skill, heat wave, and causes the desired tool to be imbued with fire. The temperature of the fire can be manipulated depending on the proficiency of the skill. Cain thinks that, due to his lack of proficiency, he can't pick up heat wave, but he's still got something pretty good. That skill allows him to use a weapon with flame properties, and he decides to test it out later. Suddenly Cain feels a pain in his head, and Can asks if he's okay. Doyle asks him to rest for a while, as his wounds could open up again if he keeps moving like that. However, Cain says that everything is fine, and that his wounds will heal. He asks them to check on the people in the cells, as they don't seem to be doing well. After saving the people, one man thanks them for saving his life and says that now they can avenge their comrades and rest in peace. Can then says that they did what had to be done. The man then comments that, in any case, he was the famous Bloody Sword. He asks who that person behind him was, if she was the fox hunter. The dog, all silly and happy, says he wanted to keep it a secret, and Doyle comments that he was famous too. Senton says that he wasn't the only one who took part in Argan's raid. He just helped his companions, and that nothing would have been possible if it hadn't been for that guy over there. The man then recalls that when Doyle found them in the cells, it was that guy who ordered him to abandon them. He may be out of line when he says it, but that guy wasn't human. Can replies that yes, he's overstepping his bounds and faces that man. Senton says that it doesn't matter what he said before. In case he hasn't realized it yet, he just saved their lives. Not to mention that, in doing so, he and Doyle were severely injured. What did they do? They were undeniably stupid enough to get stuck in that nest. They're lucky to get out alive, and it's all thanks to him. And what was the first thing they said? Watch out for him. The man then gets angry and ends up apologizing. Can asked if he didn't need to apologize to someone else, and the man approached Cain and apologized for being so rude. Cain then thinks that the strong and the weak will always bow to the stronger, and that's exactly what was happening now. The man thinks that everyone there was a damned traitor, and that before they were all gathering around him in the cell, he had always put his life on the line to get them anything they needed. But now, when he needed them, they all turned their backs. Suddenly, a man calls him boss and apologizes for not defending him, hoping he'll understand, since he knows what it's like. The boss then says that he doesn't understand what he means, and that it was just to leave him alone. The man asks him not to take it the wrong way and asks him to listen to him. He asks the boss if he doesn't need any tokens or artifacts, and the boss asks why he cares. The man says that they found the lucky clover right there, just waiting to be caught, and they could certainly make a profit from it. He asks the boss what he thinks. The boss asks if he's joking or something, and the man says they're doing it for their survival. The boss asks what survival is and if he's suggesting that they kill their saviors. The guy says no, because he hasn't said anything about killing them. Even if they tried to fight the three of them, they wouldn't stand a chance. The chief then asks what they would do, and the man explains that the lizard men have taken all their things. If they leave without anything, they won't be able to survive the night. What he's saying is that they should take what they need and run. The chief says that if they are caught, it's all over. The man replies that they will also die without supplies. The boss agrees and says they need a plan. The man says that if he thought he had come all this way without a plan, then he tells him that one of his friends has a skill called quick hands and asks if the boss has understood. The boss says yes, and they begin to work out the details of the plan. Senton says that now that Kane is back, they'll start to clear things up. He says that Doyle and he are going to take Argan's crown, as agreed, and Kane says that's fine. Kan then gets all happy, saying that he always knew Kane was a good person, and that he's very cute when he's out of sorts. Khan asks Doyle to take the crown, while Kane just thinks that the guy was trying to beat him up. But even though he was very annoying, he couldn't bring himself to hate him. The boy was really very strange. Senton looks at Argan's sword and says that possession of the lair would be limited to the blue scales, which now belong to Kane. He then thinks that the blue-scaled scimitar is not good for him, who uses daggers. The system talks about the blue-scaled scimitar, two-handed weapon rating, Class D. Description: the favorite weapon of Argan, the king of the lizardmen. This weapon is imbued with the element of fire to increase its durability, but because of its weight, it cannot be used without strong muscles. Kane thinks it might be useful for now, but it's easily disposable, as there are several of them around the tower. The system also talks about ownership of Argan's lair. It guarantees ownership of all objects and resources inside the lair. Items in the lair: a red orc helmet and 3 gold crystals. He thinks that at least there are some useful things in there. Then he sees Karina's dagger, a Class D one-handed weapon. This dagger has been used by an unnamed player all his life, and despite being made from common materials, it has the ability to harden at the player's whim. The weapon's damage will partially increase the user's proficiency. Kane thinks the blade is too worn, but it will serve him until the end of the tutorial. Doyle asks if there's anything wrong with Kane, and the CIM replies that there's nothing useful there, but that nothing is completely useless. He didn't need to worry about that, but he could break his neck if he kept watching him like that. Suddenly, when he looks up, he sees something strange on the roof of that gate. Then a voice says that he has been discovered, and Kane was thinking that he was a master of hide-and-seek. He says he just wanted to surprise him, and there was the mysterious merchant again. Doyle asks if he knows the mysterious shopkeeper, but Kane says no. The merchant is surprised, and asks how he can say such a thing, since he thought there was something special between them. The merchant then says that it's a pleasure to meet Kane and Doyle again. They haven't seen each other since they bought those passes. Kane gets sick just remembering how he spent all his attribute points. The shopkeeper says that there are only 2 ways to become friends with him: be in the top 10 of the tutorial or be recognized by him. He thinks it looks like Kane has been recognized. The shopkeeper then says that next time, Kane should pretend he didn't see him and not be such a spoilsport. Kane replies that only an idiot wouldn't feel his presence and he'd rather be that idiot. The merchant tells them not to waste time there and get straight to the point: possession of the lair, the blue-scaled scimitar, for 150 tokens. The dealer asks if he's trying to pin him, at which point Kane raises his offer to 150. However, the dealer says he can't. Kane then raises to 80, and the trader starts to get very worried and asks him to listen. So Kane raises it to 200. The merchant says that he wouldn't even profit from it, and Kane ends up saying that it's 300 now. He says he'll raise the offer more if the merchant takes his time. If he doesn't accept, he'll blow up that lair with all the magic stones inside. The merchant replies that magic stones aren't that easy to find. Kane says that he didn't know he could find magic stones with a purity of over 70% that easily, and asks if he thinks he knows more than him in this case. Kane then says that he's going to blow them all up since they're worthless. He thinks he found it very strange that Argan's lair offers fewer rewards than expected, and to compensate for this, you get possession of the lair. The tower system rewards players based on their achievements, so the reward factor didn't make sense. Argan's lair must have a deposit of rich minerals and good magic stones. Magic stones are fundamental to the storage and transfer of magic. They are like electrical conductors on Earth. Stones with a high purity are more efficient at transferring mana, and those with a purity of over 70% are sold at very high prices. The mysterious merchant was probably watching that lair because of this. The dealer then says that 300 chips is still too expensive. Kane raises it to 400. He thinks it would be more beneficial to get those stones for himself, but the higher the purity, the more difficult the extraction process, and he wouldn't have time for that. The merchant asks him to stop, saying that he's going to pay for it, so Kane shouldn't keep raising the price, otherwise he'd go bankrupt. Kane says he'll sell it for 405 tokens, and the extra 5 are for wasting his time there. The dealer says he's much worse than he is. The system informs him that Kane has sold the blue scimitar in possession of Argan's lair for 405 tokens, totaling 698 tokens. At this point, the merchant becomes very depressed, since that was all his money. Kane then says he has one more thing, and the merchant asks him what he wants more of. Kane says that the shop shopkeeper makes it sound like he's threatening him and that there's something he'd like to buy. The shopkeeper asks what it is. Kane replies that, as you can see, his mask is broken. The merchant says he has something, but it costs 4 strength. Kane asks to include it in the deal they've just made, but the merchant says he can't. Kane then says that he's right and that he wanted to cancel the deal. At this point, the merchant begins to hate Kane, almost punching the protagonist in the face. The shopkeeper then says that he noticed he was having complications with the mask and made something especially for him. The system then says that it was the face of the white ghost. Classification: headgear, Class E. The description says it's a mask with several spirits trapped in it. Simple use will give it a bizarre aura and allow the wearer to hide part of its presence. Once equipped, it will be difficult to remove, and if damaged, it can restore itself by absorbing more souls. Kane puts on the new mask and thinks it's very strange, but at the same time it won't fall off his face, and it will still repair itself. The system informs him that the face of the white ghost has been received, and Kane ends up thanking the merchant. However, the merchant has had enough and before leaving, says one thing. When Kane is negotiating with him, he was very confident, and that's because he knows what happened on the other side. Khan then asks what other side means, and the merchant says it was nothing. He was supposed to forget what he said. Khan then mentions that high-quality magic stones are used as raw materials for high-class artifacts, and even after giving that exorbitant price, the mysterious merchant still bought it. This indicates that there must be a very high and unexpected demand for magic stones. The number of players must not be the case, so Khan comes to the conclusion that the only reason for the mass production of high-class artifacts would be a war. He says that the competition between the clans and the players in the tower is very fierce. Kane asks what Khan is going to do now, and Khan asks what that means. Kane wonders what he'll do from now on, and where he'll go with all those chips. Khan can go straight to Block F. Kane thinks that his ranking has risen from 150 to 52, but the gap between him and first place is still quite big. He reflects that he still has a card up his sleeve, and that card was one of Young-Hoo's targets from the start, much more hidden in the tutorial, the guy who sits in Block E. Now it was time for him to go there. Kay says he won't be going to F Block anytime soon, as he has something he needs to do. Doyle says that he and Kane were actually thinking about something. He says that they really liked Kane and that they worked very well as a group, so why wouldn't they form a group now? Khan asks if Doyle wants him to join them, and Doyle says yes, until the end of the tutorial or forever. He and Kane were talking about it, and their chemistry as a group is extremely good, and their roles complement each other. Doyle asks Kane what he thinks about it, but Kane says he can't do that. Doyle asks why, and Kane replies that he's already told him there's something he has to do. Doyle asks if they could get together later, and Kane says that he never intended to form a group, and that he's never been one to develop social relationships. Doyle, very sad, says he understands. At this point, Kane says that there's nothing that can be done, since everyone has their own reasons, and they shouldn't force their ideals on someone else if it makes them feel uncomfortable. Khan suggests that at least they could leave that place together, and that they should go back since there are people waiting for them outside. Changing the scene, Khan thinks that the lizard men's swamp is quite large, and that it takes time to cross it, as you have to be careful where you step. Stepping in the wrong place could lead you to sink into the swamp and get stuck until a lizard man comes along. Because of this, he has agreed to continue traveling with Kane and Doyle until they at least get out of that area. Other players are stuck behind Kane and Doyle, and Khan wonders why they don't try to get out of the swamp on their own, but he thinks that would mean their deaths. Kane asks what they plan to do with all those people, and Khan replies that they can't do anything about it. They'll have to take them until they get out of the swamp. Kane says that they are not obliged to look after them. Khan then says that there is still something called human recognition, and asks how they could just leave them there. Kane thinks that he always thought those two were too soft. Despite looking very different, a man approaches Doyle and asks if he has anything to eat. Kane thinks that they are too nice to people, and that nature is their weakness. Doyle apologizes for not sharing with everyone earlier, but says he can eat that. Kane thinks that it's in these places that hunters gather to take advantage of this weakness, and they won't listen to him even if he warns them. Besides, they'll go their separate ways once they're out of there, so he doesn't really need to worry about that. Changing scenes, a guy tells Eden that he brought him what he asked for, and that kid gave it to him immediately when he asked. Eden says that's great. He thinks he suspected that they were the kind of people who would decide to take responsibility for so many people on the way, but they're totally naive. He reflects that the first part of the plan was to steal his belongings, while that idiot Brendan attacked the three of them. Eden thinks that they really are a bunch of idiots. If they think they're just going to steal the tokens and artifacts while distracting their attention, just stealing things isn't enough, since their opponents are Kane, Doyle, rank 3 and rank 11. Besides, that other player was the guy who fought the Lizard King. If they get rid of those three, taking first place in the rankings will no longer be just a dream. He says that there were a few times when their eyes met during the journey, and although he doesn't know if it was a coincidence or not, he was a little wary of that guy in the mask. He thinks they're late and that something doesn't seem right. Those cold eyes behind the white mask seem to be staring at a goblin, as if they could see right through him and read what he was thinking. Suddenly, a man tells Khan that some people aren't feeling well and asks if it would be all right if they slowed down a bit, as they're very tired. One of the men says that they will be killed by the monsters if they stop there. Khan wonders if they should leave those guys there. After giving them a few tokens, the man says that it looks like they're all exhausted after being confined for a while. He knows that the three of them were busy, but asks if they could find a place to rest for a while. Edson thinks that they will certainly say yes, as he has already prepared a special place for them, where their friends are waiting. There are dozens of people hidden around the place, and as soon as the prey reaches the designated area, the trap will spring into action and attack Khan first. He thinks that this would make a fine course of action, but suddenly realizes that Sim is watching. At that moment, Sim ends up killing that guy without a second thought, and everyone wonders what he's doing. Okay, so he thinks his goal is to get rid of these bastards who have a close connection to the guy he just killed. So he goes after some people and starts killing them one by one. He believes he was able to deduce what they were planning, thanks to his passive ability of heightened senses. The way he looked at Khan, and how he was observing his attitudes, when he seemed to be telling the other players what to do or trying to avoid eye contact during the conversation, indicated that he had probably already told the others his secret. That's when he decided to extend his senses to a much wider area, to be sure of things. He discovered that there were countless people hiding around that open space, and the only reason for that was that they were scavengers. He said he would attack them first. Just then, Khan comes up to him, asking why he's doing this out of the blue. Tim asks him if he's stupid or naive. Kane asks him what the hell he's talking about, and Kane replies that if he still doesn't understand what's going on, he should shut up and stand there. At that moment, they ended up surrounded by several people. Kane says he never imagined something like this could happen. One of the men asked what everyone was doing, and the other replied that it wasn't obvious, since they were just using those guys. So he ends up hitting that man. Kane then thinks that they killed normal players, but who the hell were they? He then deduces that they are the owners of the human farm, and the scavengers are not just bandits. Some members even ally themselves with monsters. They lure other players by pretending to be injured and asking for help, only to kidnap them. They steal their victims' items and sell their meat to allied monsters. It's very likely that most players who go to the human farm will end up dead. Kane then changes, and a person asks if it's the bloody sword and the foxtail, saying that they would profit a lot if they actually got them. The man speaking through the crystal says that they are very strong, and after Edora's Fant, it would be fun if they destroyed them, since they probably had a lot of good items as well. Keto mentions that he wants the draconic killing sword, and believes that the bloody sword will probably be with him. The name of the man listening to all this was Gibson, and the other man was called Noin. There was another man in the conversation called Sven. Ziv asks if they could shut up now, because he's going to take care of dividing up the items. He asks them to focus and think about how to use the Lizard King's reward. He then says that it seems they were running late, and that something wasn't right at the moment. He asks to send a message to Eden, but no one else was answering, since everyone had been killed. The man then thinks that they had been arguing about who would get the items for a while, but now he wonders what was going on. He realizes that they could only be enemies and comments that his current rank is 15, but his skills are at top 10 level. Then he asks who was watching him. He thinks, why couldn't he detect the enemy while his allies were being killed? Just then, someone comes up to him, asking him to run, and he ends up falling to the ground dead. Behind him was our protagonist, with a bloodthirsty look on his face, returning to Cam's scene. He wonders where the people of Aranga were, since they were policing everything there, saying that they wanted to make the tutorial much fairer. So how could something like this be happening at that moment? Kane had already killed many people, and Kane and Doi ended up taking part in it. They say that the scavengers succumbed faster than anyone could have expected. The other people left claim that they were just following orders, and that they had to do whatever they wanted, otherwise they would die too. Khan then asks them how they are different from Argon. The guys didn't quite understand what he was saying. C, very angry, asks what they have that's different from that cannibal monster that ate so many people. At least Argon cried when he saw his family die, while they probably laughed when they sold those people, and probably also enjoyed killing the survivors. The man then asks how they can forget that he is called the Bloody Sword, and that he is the son of a tower player who decided to come out of the shadows after his father won a title for himself. He would never be kind to people after that. Kane and Adil were very depressed, and Khan thinks that they are probably shocked to see that they saved vicious murderers instead of slaves who had already been captured and killed by the Lizard King. He believes it's the first time they've have experienced something like this, and it was quite common in Africa, so he's used to it. Some people felt like deities and others were furious with those responsible. Either way, they will have internal conflicts, and at times like this he can't really do anything. He can only wait until they make up their minds. Kane then asks how Kane was doing so well, and Kane replies that he's used to it. Kane says that he can't imagine what kind of life he lived, and asks if everyone in the world was like that. Khan then comments that his world would have gone crazy if it was like that. Kane says that, to be honest, he was surprised by these people playing the victim, but honestly, they were both scared too, and Kane probably suspected them from the start, since he never lost his cool. Then he asks Kane if he's never trusted anyone since the beginning. He thinks that meant he never trusted them either. Kane reflects that he never planned to trust anyone at the tower from the start, which is why their relationship couldn't end well. They must both be hurt to realize that he was only thinking of them as colleagues, not friends. But it's not as if he thought of them as complete strangers. Khan's laughter and Doyley's affection created a warm atmosphere around them, but each had their own worldview, just like him. Khan then said that now they were going to split up. He thinks that since they can't get along, the only choice was to split up. Doyley tries to talk to him, but is interrupted by Cam. Doyley asks what he's doing, and Kane just asks him to be quiet and sit down. Doyley retorts, asking what he means by that, since Sim has been nice to them the whole time. Kane says again that he told him to sit down, as it was the best thing to do, and asks if Doyley hadn't noticed. Suddenly, Doyley looks down and sees a tassel. Kane says that's exactly what it was, a symbol of the harangue, and asks why even the Blue Sword Guild, which cares so much about maintaining order, would take part in something like that. It is explained that the Blue Sword Guild supports the harangue group, as well as being one of the 10 largest guilds in the tower. It already has countless candidates to join the guild, so they are not interested in new players. That's why many were confused when the Blue Sword Guild decided to take control of the tutorial, but no one dared to confront them, since no one knew what the guild's intentions were. The reason for this move was to control the most efficient pickers. Doyley comments that, if you think about it, they said that the reason for creating the harangue group was to get rid of the scavengers, while the Ardia group was going through the tutorial. Senton says that it seems they wanted a better way of controlling them. He then thinks that's why he didn't want to drag Kane into it, as he seemed to have something very important to do. Doyley thinks he now understands why he didn't want to get in Chim's way. Canton says that he really wants to see the one from Build It, and that he should go to Big Hade first. Khan and Doyley needed the Argan crown for this secret item, and this sword would not only help them get through the Adora and Fonte brothers' points they had accumulated, but it was also their main goal for this tutorial. Dalito asks Khan what he was talking about, saying that he also wants to see the faces of those idiots and hear what they have to say about it. Sito then switches to our protagonist, who thinks he can't even imagine where those two have gone, apart from their plan. Judging by the sudden farewell, he knows he has to go east. It doesn't matter what he does. If he misses the only chance he has, he'll never reach his destination again. He wonders if those two had asked him for help before they split up. Switching scenes to Build It, he asks if the two squads have been eliminated. The man replies that it seems so, and says that those people are behind it, without a shadow of a doubt. He sent them because they said they would handle it, but they only killed themselves to do it, and lost Argan for nothing. He then comments that everyone is an idiot, and wonders why they have to involve him in these things. He asks them to prepare Squad 1, and the man is startled, asking why Squad 1. He explains that Squad 1 is made up of members of Harangue's elite group, who have been personally trained by the Blue Sword Guild. The man accepts that Build It wants to use the squad just to get rid of 3 people. Build It says that those 3, Bloody Sword, Foxtail, and the Masked Man, defeated Squad 2 with extreme ease. They're much stronger than they thought. Baidan reflects that he never imagined this would happen so soon after they finished collecting all the sacrifices, but they need to be careful, as the Bloody Sword and Foxtail are very strong. He suspects that the Masked Man has also been trained by an equally powerful organization, and that they need to get rid of them as discreetly as possible. The peace and alliances within the tower are beginning to weaken, and with Artia's disappearance, a war could break out at any moment. That's why they need to conserve their forces as much as possible before it happens, and all of this must be kept secret. Suddenly, they hear an enemy attack, and Build It asks what's going on. A man comes shouting, informing them that it was them, the Bloody Sword and Foxtail. They arrive on the scene, destroying the wall. Khan releases his aura, frightening everyone there. Boo says that he was starting to get bored at the tutorial, and that he's arrived just in time, suggesting that they play around a bit, calling Khan son of the Iron Lion. At that moment, the two of them start a battle. Moving on to Plani Maron, in the domain of the orcs, Our protagonist was killing some orcs and asked a question: if anyone had seen a hunter's house nearby, somewhere on top of a mountain. The orc replied that he hadn't seen anything, but others had seen the house at the top of Bader, although they couldn't reach it because it was too high. Kai then says that he has finally found the person who knows where the secret item is, the Akasha snake, and that he is an ally. The Akasha snake will only be revealed at a certain time, in a specific environment, when certain conditions are met, and he really couldn't find it without this person's help. Kai asks the orc where this is, and is told that Akasha's snake only comes to the surface on rare occasions to breathe and fill its empty stomach. His brother ended up meeting this snake in person, while trying to capture it without any prior knowledge, and that man saved his brother from great danger. The first master, Jungo Galad. He comes to a house and wonders if it's there. He starts knocking on the door, asking if anyone is there. Suddenly, a man appears, asking who the hell he is. The protagonist thinks that Galad is not a human, but an elf, a dark elf to be exact, a kind of elf skilled in combat. He introduces himself as Cain. The elf asks what the fuck he's doing in front of someone else's house. Cain explains that a friend told him about him, that's why he came to buy something, and asks if his name is Galad, and if he's looking for the cup of Umini. Galad asks who told him about it, and Cain replies that it was Bran. The elf then thinks that Bran is a longtime friend of Galad's, just like the second master, Jong-gu, and that he's never met that guy before in his life, but it's not like he needs to. Galad calls him a bastard and says he asked him to keep his mouth shut about it, then invites Cain in. Galad says they need to talk and asks if Cain wants the cup. Cain says yes. Then it is explained that the Cup of Umini is an artifact that contains an incredible amount of Akasha spirit, the favorite food of the Akasha serpent. The problem is that Galad is the only one who knows how to make it. Galad asks if Cain knows what it will cost, and Cain says he has an idea. The elf says fine, and they begin. Then the system appears, informing you that this is a secret mission, Galad's test. Galad has tested many players so far, looking for a worthy one. He is known for being as fast as the wind itself. The aim is to play hide and seek with him. If someone manages to touch him in 5 out of 10 attempts, they pass the test. The reward depends on the number of successes, more than 3 times the Cup of Umini, more than 5 times the Cup of Umini, and a mysterious gift. It is said that, even after decades, only 5 people have been able to pass Galad's test, and whoever manages to catch him every time will receive one of his abilities. Wind Steps, a unique ability even among dark elves. This ability allows the person to move quickly, as well as increasing their stealth, but it doesn't end there. Wind Steps can evolve into teleportation, a skill exclusive to All for One, the current Hanker. Galad explains that the test is very simple. He just has to find Galad and touch him. He will have 15 minutes per attempt, and as the difference in skills is immense, Galad will give the protagonist an advantage. He won't use his hands or any other skills apart from those involving movement. Then he says they're going to start now, and suddenly Galad disappears. Khan thinks that Galad really is like the wind, and that he can't keep up with him at all, but with his heightened senses and dragon vision, he can see his trail. Kai then throws a blade and almost hits him. He thinks that Wind Steps has a fatal flaw. It requires the user to use their feet to move, which means they have to step on the ground once. As long as this is the case, his eyes will always find a pattern of movement. This time, he's on the west side, on top of that dead tree, so he ends up throwing another dagger, going behind his back to touch him. However, the Galliad quickly dodges, but suddenly Cain grabs him by the wrist and says that that was the first touch and already counts as 1 out of 10. The system then informs him that he has succeeded in catching the Galliad 7 times and has completed the final condition of the mission. He has qualified to receive the Cup of Agini and can ask for an extra reward. The Galliad is very surprised by this, thinking he would be defeated so easily, and asks, "What the hell did that kid do? This game wasn't supposed to be this easy." Kai then replies that it's a trade secret. The Galliad thinks that this guy could be what he's been waiting for all these years. He asks Cain to follow him and tells him to take it. Cain wonders how he could leave something so precious in a corner like that. As he opens the bag, he wonders if that was the Cup of a General. The system says, Cup of a Din, class a gem, a spiritual gem made of Akasha. It is a worthless treasure for those who are able to use the box, but a danger for those who don't know. The blessing of a Janini contains the essence of a Janini, the spirit of water. The Galliad warns Cain to be very careful not to break it, because if the contents leak out, it will be a disaster. Cain replies that he already knows this and thinks that the box is something that may not exist in that material world. Releasing it into the material world would cause a huge explosion. He then asks to take it and hands Cain a book. The system then says, Wind Steps, Class C, Proficiency 0.0%, a skill that only warriors chosen by the Dark Elves can achieve. The body becomes lighter, allowing the practitioner to use more agile movements and attacks. Attack speed increases while the skill is active, and when the enemy dies, attack speed doubles for 5 seconds. The critical hit chance increases by 7%. He learned the wind step skill. Kai thinks that his body felt incredibly light, and the system informs him that he can now move quickly, and his senses have been improved. He then thinks that, now he's finished his preparations, it's time for the main event. He can finally increase his mana after taking Akka's serpent, and his core is giant. After all, the Galliad comments that, come to think of it, there are many splendid players like him in the tutorial round, and people who can catch up with him are often rare these days. Maybe he's getting a bit old. Kane then asks if there was anyone who came before him, and the Galliad confirms it. He mentions that there were 2 people who he thinks were siblings, and they got the Atara skill just like him. Kai says he understands and thinks he knows who they are. The rank 1 and 2 from the tutorial, Idora and Fun. It makes sense that they would have gone that far, judging by the number of points they have. The Galliad asks what he intends to do with it, and anyway, he doesn't seem to be an alchemist or an elementalist. He can't understand why he needs a cup from a Janini. Kai then says that he was thinking of taking the snake from Akka. The Galliad is very surprised by this statement, and Kane asks if there's anything wrong with it. The Galliad apologizes, but informs him that the snake had already been killed, as the brothers he mentioned had killed it. They arrive at the site, which is covered in blood. Kai wonders how they knew about that place, and only Artia should know about it, since she only appears once every 3 days or so in the tutorial. But those marks are from at least a week ago. Nito sees the body of the dead snake there, which surprises him greatly. He comments that the brothers only took out the 2 most important parts, the snake's core and the venom gland. He wonders how on earth they managed to kill something so strong that even a large group of players find it difficult. That means those 2 are strong on that level. However, he realizes that there was something more. He takes off his mask and wonders what he should do now. He needs to take first place in the rankings and continue his revenge. The problem is the amount of time he has left. At most, he'll probably be in 11th place, and 8th if he's very lucky, but reaching the top spot is now impossible. To make matters worse, he needs Akka's snake core to keep evolving. He reflects on the many obstacles that are getting in the way of his plans. Suddenly, he wonders what that was. There is a large crack in the snake's head, as if something had been removed from its skull. He then wonders if it was the snake's brain, and notices that there are several footprints there, looking like another group came and went after Idora and Fun. He comments that it could have been oars and has a bad feeling about the whole thing, so he needs to check it out. The system informs him that the time remaining until the tutorial is completed is 15,043 seconds. The scene switches to the 6th place in the tutorial, where another man tells him that Build It has summoned all the members of the first squad to leave. B then replies that he should send another one, as he's busy trying to increase his rank right now. If he tells Build It that, he should understand. He thinks that the people in the tower will only recognize his efforts if he's in the top 5, and wasting time on something silly was pointless. Besides, there's still someone there who isn't even in the top 10. The man comments that these are special orders from the Build It being, and informs them that all those who don't follow his orders will have their heads cut off. He asks the first squad to join. In addition, whoever completes the mission will receive all the tokens that Harang collected. This surprises Obai, who wonders if it really was all of Harang's token reserve. He concludes that this would mean giving thousands and thousands of tokens to a single person, which is enough to affect the hang. What's more, it means that Build It will give full support to the person who completes his order. The other man says that he's also told to keep an eye out, as these people have completely decimated the second squad. Bon thinks that they got rid of the people from the second squad, so that meant they also had their chips. Those idiots also have the chips from the second squad, and he thinks that reaching the top 5 ranks now is not impossible. He asks them to tell Build It that he'll be going to the site right away. The scene shifts to our protagonist, whose quick steps have increased to 1.2%. He thinks he didn't know such a place existed, and wonders what's in there. The system informs him that he has entered the home of the snake Akasha. He is surprised, realizing that this is the home of the Akasha snake, and that perhaps there are Akasha snake eggs or even a partner in there. Judging by the way those orcs picked his brain so naturally, he suspects that there is a secret hidden there, and whatever it is, it will probably be more incredible than the Akasha serpent itself. Suddenly he sees a group of orcs, a sect. One of them says that their gods have been killed by pathetic humans and asks them to come out and relive their anger by sacrificing the souls of all the warriors so that they can unleash their wrath on the humans. So they end up burning those bodies. Kai wonders if they're crazy. Just then, the snake's brain comes out, and the system informs him that there is a hidden mission, the snake's resurrection ceremony. The box is made up of a physical body and astral energy, so if there is enough strength, the snake will be able to revive. Since ancient times, orcs have followed the tradition of reviving the dead Akasha serpent through a resurrection ceremony. The system asks him to stop the ceremony by killing the snake before it grows. The reward is unknown. He is amazed to learn that the Akasha serpent could be revived and thinks that the outcome of that mission could turn out to be better than he planned, since the longer he spends there, the bigger the serpent will become, and the more powerful its core will be. To revive Akasha's serpent, someone needs to use the box or its life force as the main ingredient. As with Batory's vampiric dagger, the more vitality it absorbs, the stronger it becomes. This means that he will need a vast amount of energy. He thinks that the snake must be hungry, as it has just revived, and wonders where it can accumulate enough life force to satisfy its hunger. He concludes that the glass of a Janini will not be enough for that monster, which means that the only method left is to bring more sacrifices. The scene changes to the lizard men. One of them says that they couldn't leave their world knowing that the king is dead, especially the orcs. As soon as they find out, they will attack, so everyone was supposed to keep up the rear guard. He is the 21st leader of the lizard men, Kulak. He comments that it really is a disaster. Suddenly, Kane appears and sticks a dagger in his neck. He places the body of an orc there and says that anyone who sees it will assume that the two died in a fight. Using the power of flames, he mentions that the skill is still at a very low level, so those flames are small, but enough to set things on fire. He then states that their next destination is in the western part of the jungle. The lizard men comment that there were orcs invading there, and Kane asks if he should stir things up a bit. At that moment, they are told that flames have been lit in the jungle region. Although small, because they used an abandoned kobold village as fuel, they quickly spread. The fire then spread to the surrounding areas and took over the jungle. After losing their homes, large groups of kobolds and goblins began a mass migration, which caused them to collide with monsters from nearby areas. To minimize the damage, they had to avoid some areas, and the confusion spread throughout the block like a domino effect. Just then, a goblin calls out to his boss, who introduces himself as Granum, the Goblin King. The king asks if it's true that the orcs are getting closer, and the goblin confirms that yes, the tribes have already been killed. The king says he doesn't know why, but he will never forget the goblin's grudge. A goblin mentions that a kobold has sent a message to take revenge on the orcs together and form an alliance. The king asks them to find these allies now and kill the orcs. Suddenly, the two races come together, claiming that the orcs have also killed their leaders and now want revenge. They say that the ogres and trolls are also in disgrace and have a temporary truce. The Goblin King emphasizes that they must hurry because the lizard men are at war with the orcs. Therefore, they must be brave. At that moment, everyone unites with the aim of killing the orcs. The system informs him that he has caused the monsters nearby to start a war in order to guide them into an internal conflict, and he will receive additional karma. Another system appears, announcing a surprise mission, the monster invasion. The monsters of the block have never officially invaded the territory of another, however, this unstable relationship has been broken and the monsters have started a gigantic war. The mission is to survive the chaotic war and find a way to end it. Kai comments that this is exactly what he wanted. The reward will be the title of Monster Hunter, the second eye of the Goblin King, the third gem of the 5 colors of the monsters, and additional karma. He thinks that the Akasha serpent will be able to resurrect faster if there is more life force, and wonders if they should include the lizard men. It is possible that the Akasha serpent will be resurrected today, and will be the largest that has ever existed. Through the tutorial, he considers that the board table is finally ready, and that he will only act when really necessary. For now, all he has to do is sit back and watch the show. The scene changes to B, who asks why there are so many useless idiots there. The other man replies that the only idiot is him. The two start arguing, and a third man asks them to stop acting like children and suggests that they complete the mission as quickly as possible, given the time they've already lost. From what he's heard, the target is near an orc village, so they need to act fast. Suddenly, they hear a noise, and the ground begins to shake. All the monsters gathered together form a gigantic army that sets off in their direction. Everyone wonders what the hell is going on and starts running for their lives, while the monsters shout at them to get out of the way or they'll be killed. B thinks it can't really be happening. His dream has always been to be a sword of the Blue Sword clan, and he's not going to fall so easily because of those weak monsters. Suddenly, a goblin appears from behind him and throws an axe at him, saying that it's too fast. In the orc tribe, the orcs discuss how the lizard men started a war. The orc king asks what the reason is, and they say they don't know for sure, only that the lizard man king was killed. The orc king wonders how those crazy lizards dare to do this, especially in the middle of the resurrection ceremony of their god. However, the orc king thinks that this is perfect, as they can get more sacrifices for their god. He asks them to warn the shaman to be careful, and that they will soon have more sacrifices. The war was raging, and other monsters managed to invade the orcs' territory. At that moment, the Goblin King approaches the Orc King and says that it's been too long, so the two don't think twice and start a fierce battle. The scene shifts to our protagonist, whose light step skill has increased to level 12.4. He returns to the home of the serpent Akasha and thinks that the two, Granum, the Goblin King, and Farka, the Orc King, are fighting now. Both are boss monsters with levels equivalent to Argon, and the fight won't be over quickly. What's more, the tension of the war will only increase as more damage is dealt, making the situation even more chaotic. It is therefore necessary to bring back the Akasha snake as quickly as possible to a place where there is plenty of prey. At that moment, the snake is feeding, and the orcs comment that their god is very angry. The snake starts killing all the orcs that are there, and Kai notes that this was to be expected, as it was thirsty for blood. Besides, it's been a while since her resurrection, so she's probably very hungry and can't control herself on such a bloody battlefield. She starts to break through the wall and heads off towards the southeast, where the monsters are fighting each other. He says that it was more than perfect for him, and that they wouldn't call it a hidden piece for nothing, so he's sure he's hiding something very big in there. He fights the snake. The box is so difficult that, in fact, it shouldn't even be in the tutorial. That means there must be a reason why it's there. Even Galliad, who's been after it for a long time, has never found that reason. But one thing is certain, whatever the reason, it is by no means insignificant. He then says that there must be somewhere out there where the snake can rest and be safe. Outside, he begins to walk around the place and mentions that the air was freezing. Suddenly, he comes across a person meditating. He says that Aquila was a mythical root, a humanoid. The system then says that it is a mythical humanoid root, like a class of divine root elixir, a root that is said to grow only from ice crystals that have been exposed to moonlight for hundreds of years, and that resembles a child, so it is normal to mistake it for a human being. Khan then comments that mythical humanoid roots are one of the rarest among divine roots. The system then informs him that after consuming it, one's magical potential will increase greatly. However, the increase in power varies depending on the amount the consumer can ingest and the method of consumption, which is also quite delicate. Kanon thinks he's heard of it being an extremely effective herb, and he never imagined he'd find one of them there. Perhaps the reason the Akaxa snake rests there is to cultivate this root. He comments that, judging by its size, the root must be at least 300 years old. The efficiency of a humanoid mythical root reaches its maximum between its 500 years of age, and the Akaxa serpent was probably waiting until then. He then laments that this root is about to go into his belly. At that moment, the root opens its eyes, and Kane comments that it was as far as it could go in that small place. He throws a few daggers at the root, but it dodges. The root then starts screaming and Kane apologizes for it, but it wasn't the first time he had hunted something like it. Just then, the roof falls on his head, but he manages to dodge it. Finally, Kane catches the root. After that, it literally turns into a plant, and the system informs him that he has consumed the secret piece, the mythical humanoid root. The divine power of the root is spreading through his body, and his magical abilities begin to increase. 52% of the power of the divine root has been digested and converted into magical power, and his body has begun to absorb it. Thus, his magic began to increase greatly, and his body's awakening process is down to 4.9%. The system informs him that his awakened body has changed from that of an immature dragon to that of a half-dragon, and he has gained the ability to circulate magic. He then thinks that magic is not at all easy to control, but he can feel the flow of it throughout his body. The system informs him of the magic circulation, which is of rank C, with mastery at 0.0%. Since ancient times, dragons have always been a race blessed by mana. Those blessed by dragons are given the ability to control magic, and the higher the mastery, the more magic you can control, allowing you to increase the number of magical abilities and even control the flow of mana. Khan says it was finally done. Changing the scene, Bayan stands up bloodied after that massacre. He comments that the first squad was completely destroyed, but the direction those monsters were heading was where that guy was. He's sure that this guy had something planned, and bets that it was a secret piece, probably the best piece ever found in the tutorial. He then thinks that no matter what Kane is planning, he'll set a trap to steal that piece as soon as he finds it. If he combines this with the reward from this mission, he has a good chance of reaching Adora and Fant, and he tells them he was after Kane. Switching the scene to our protagonist, he comments that he already knew the secret to being able to control magic, accumulating more magical power, and progressing in his awakening. He says that the only time he has used magic so far was when he activated his abilities, but now he has several other options. For example, he can wrap a weapon in magic to increase its power, or concentrate magic in his foot to increase his movement speed. However, he recognizes that it will be difficult to control the flow of magic perfectly, as his proficiency in magical circulation was very low. With his improved senses, he should be able to master it quickly, just as he did with the light step skill. He mentions that controlling the flow of magic will affect his senses. Suddenly, he sees a golden necklace lying on the ground and wonders what it is. The system then informs him that it is a necklace full of memories memories, of the F-class pendant type, which carries precious memories of someone, and it would be good if it were returned to the owner. The protagonist wonders who the owner might be, and when he opens the pendant, he realizes that it's a photo of Galliard's family. He is then told that no one knows why the Galliard has been hunting the Acaxa snake for so long, and yet he rarely hunts it alone. Instead, he offers his skills as a reward to those who claim to be hunters. But if the reason behind this is to recover an object of sentimental value that carries the memory of his family, it makes a lot of sense. Khan then thinks that his brother's diary never mentioned anything about Gilead's family, and that this must be what he was looking for. In fact, he ends up keeping that necklace. He then puts his mask back on and says he's going hunting. The scene then switches to King York and the Goblin King fighting. At that moment, in the middle of the war, the box appears and the orc wonders why the god was there. The Goblin King lunges at the snake, hitting it very hard in the head, and the orc king helps him by hitting the snake as well. Kanon, observing all this, says that the whole thing was a mess. It turned out to be much better than he expected. Only a tenth of the monsters were still alive at that point, and thanks to that, the Acacia snake had already become 1.5 times larger than normal. The two kings are on the front line, fending off the snake, while the rest of the monsters try to scratch it with a few attacks. He mentions that it won't last long, as the kings are at their limits. He then says that it was now time for the grand finale, and activates his skill proficiency. Mana circulation has risen to 0.7%. The proficiency of the quick step skill is said to have risen by 15%. He ends up landing right on top of the snake's head, and the proficiency of Bader's vampiric dagger has risen to 8.2%. The more attacks he made, the more his strength, stamina, and magic increased. In a matter of seconds, he ended up defeating the boss, Akasha's serpent, and earned additional karma for it. The system then informs him that he has completed the secret mission Ceremony of Resurrection and the surprise mission Monster Onslaught. In all, he earned 8,000 additional karma. He then opens the snake's body, taking out its core. He says that it was originally the size of a fist, but ended up getting much bigger due to the amount of food it had absorbed. He says that now it was time to devour it. The system informs him that he has consumed a huge amount of Akasha and that his magical abilities have begun to increase. A large amount of poison has spread throughout his body, and his magical abilities have begun to increase due to the gigantic amount of poison in essence. A considerable amount of time will be needed to convert it, and as a half-dragon, he can't absorb all the magic. Therefore, his body will undergo a transformation, and the progress of the awakening will resume. The system informs him that the body's awakening process is resuming, and it is recommended that he cultivate his magic in a safe place. Receiving a major trauma at that time could result in the body's awakening progress being set back or failing, and the estimated time is 15 hours. He is then told that those eyes are actually the eyes of a predator. The Orc King then thinks that now he understands everything. That guy was actually responsible for all this. The Orc King goes after him, saying that he was going to die. Kanon thinks that the two kings are boss-type monsters and are on the same level as Argon, so naturally, they will offer a good amount of karma and tokens when they are defeated. So with just one blow, the protagonist manages to finish off the Orc King. The system informs him that he has defeated a boss-type monster, Farrak, the Orc King, and additional karma will be awarded after he rips the Orc King's head off. He throws the head at the Goblin King's foot and then ends up defeating the Goblin King as well. He thinks there were only two options for the surviving monsters: resist to the end or run. He says he didn't go after those who ran because they were all weak anyway. However, he ended up taking proper care of those who resisted and absorbed all their life essence. The more he absorbed, the stronger he became, and the rate of progress of his body's awakening increased rapidly. There were no limits to his ambition, so he devoured as much as he could. He said he would do anything to become stronger at that moment. After a while, he comments that absorbing hundreds of monsters has left him very exhausted, and that he would love to rest for a while. However, he said that there was still an insect alive and asked it to appear. Just then, Bion appears and asks him how he knew he was there. Kainon replies that only an idiot wouldn't have noticed, since he couldn't control his emotions at all. Bion then says that he was a damn monster and thinks he's been watching since the Akasha snake started the massacre. If he gets that power and all the pieces he has, that would be more than great. Kainon then says that he would take this monstrous power with him. Bion asks how he intends to do that, and Kainon tells him not to act indifferently, saying that he was too exhausted to do anything. Kainon then says he'll ask him again what he intends to do about it, since he wasn't the only one there. Suddenly, Bion is shot right in the face, and it was actually Gilead who shot him. Gilead was wondering why the forest was suddenly so chaotic and asked if it was all Kanon's doing. Kanon then replies that that guy was completely right, and that his bodily progress was going so fast that it left him too exhausted to do anything. Gilead turned up at just the right moment. He wonders if it was fate or just a coincidence. It seems that now he can rest. Kanon then said that there was a present for Gilead. At that moment, Gilead is very surprised, surprised, but then Kanon collapses in his arms. Gilead thinks that he can never understand what's going on in his head and thinks that Kanon was telling him to return the gift. The system then reports that the body transformation was a success. The reinforced body skill has evolved into Golden Body. He has successfully converted 94% of Akasha's essence and poison into magic, and the progression of the body awakening has been confirmed. He has now become much stronger, but the awakening process can no longer continue. Current progress stands at 92.5%. His awakening state has changed from half a dragon's body to an incomplete dragon's body. Kanon stands up, saying that even after absorbing all that, the awakening process was still not complete. What's impressive is that a dragon's blood isn't complete even after all that. His status has skyrocketed after all those fights, and his ability to circulate magic has increased a lot, even though he only learned it a day before. He says he's feeling a very strange sensation, and although it's strange, it's familiar at the same time, as if he has another arm. He is told that there can be a massive difference in the effectiveness of magic, depending on how you use it. He concludes that he can now use it freely and must test ways of using offensive magic. In addition, his senses are sharper. He says that his eyes seem more sensitive to light, and that his sense of smell is going crazy with so many smells. This is very similar to the first time he activated his advanced senses. Gilead then asks if he's awake yet and says that he's probably just woken up. He recommends that Kanon lies down, as it will take a while for his senses to return to normal. Gilead says that he helped Kanon a little. The protagonist asks what he meant by that, and Gilead replies that he did something to strengthen his body, but that he needed a safe place while he was unconscious. So he ended up helping, but points out that Kanon's methods were completely wrong, since he not only consumed the Akasha snake's enormous core, but also something equivalent before that. He consumed something that was already very difficult to digest. Naturally, before his body could finish it, he consumed something else. Gilead wonders if Kanon thought his body would be able to handle all this. He's sure that Kanon will argue that he had a plan, or that he could handle it, but he was about to lose control and explode. Kanon thinks he understood what Gilead meant. It seems that he did something that stopped Kanon from dying. The protagonist reflects that Gilead was a very famous hunter, even among the Dark Elves, and it's not surprising that he has a healing ability. Gilead then says that he only did one thing here or there, but that it was only possible because he was completely without magic. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult. Even if he's in the same situation today, it's not to consume things irresponsibly, at least not until he becomes a real dragon. Kanon thinks that his body was under the contract of a dragon, and that in fact, he didn't need Gilead's help. He had achieved a very strong body, considering that the progress of the awakening was taking place. He could have dealt with it on his own, however. Gilead isn't aware of this, and also because he thought Kanon was his benefactor, he thinks he should help. Kanon says that he relieved his magical disorder and changed the flow of his magic. Gilead says that he used that wavy glass he gave him to prevent Kanon's body from exploding, with the same method he used to create that item. You ask him if he has any idea how much work that was. Kanon thanks Gilead, who replies that he doesn't think that alone will get him off the hook. Kanon says he'll pay the debt, but the elf tells him not to say things he can't fulfill. However, since he's talking so much, it seems that he's fine. Gilead ends up thanking Kanon for getting his necklace back. Changing scenes, Kanon thinks that Unini's divine water is one of Gilead's secret abilities, and wonders if Unini's chalice was originally created to be worn on the body. The magical force it contains is overwhelming, and Gilead ended up administering the chalice of Unini, the one he had given him, to him. This makes Kanon wonder something. If it helped him absorb magic more efficiently, his body and senses developed more than he expected. He really was lucky this time. Gilead says that he still needs to rest for another 4 days until he recovers completely, and that he won't recover quickly and won't be able to move either. Suddenly, however, our protagonist jumps up and leaves. Gilead thinks that if he said that someone like that boy had been lying in bed with a serious injury for a short time, no one would believe it. He also wonders how he managed to get so good at shunpo. It's like it's one of his innate abilities. Kanon then wonders if this was what it felt like to use magic. All he did was put some of it on his feet, but who would have thought there would be such a difference in using shunpo with magic? Statistically speaking, it's only a 1% difference. It's possible that he hasn't been using his movement skills properly so far. He then says, if this is 92% of my awakening, what will it be like when I complete the remaining 88%? He stops and looks at his system. Kanon says he thinks he completed 2 missions before passing out. Now he's going to get the reward from the secret mission first. He receives a black bracelet from a mysterious source, and the class of that item is unknown. It's a precious bracelet, created for Akasha's serpent master. The snake has always awaited its master's return, which is why it has kept its precious bracelet in its stomach. The system then says, Reaper of Souls. There is a chance for a player to reap the soul of a person killed by them. Kanon thinks that he can now collect the souls of his victims, and says that this was a very morbid ability. The system adds that the souls will not retain their memories or the status of their past life, only their resentment resentment. He also mentions the gum of the black blade. Souls can be converted into magic with dark properties. Kanan wonders if the former owner was a demon. The system says that he can fuse souls into cursed weapons and attack. That was a unique artifact. Some features are sealed, and some information can't be read. Plus, he doesn't have permission or meet the requirements to use or view that item. Kanan thinks it's definitely a very powerful item. Since it's unique, he can't find out more about it and says he bets that the secret power of the bracelet is in there. Perhaps something like the original power of the owner. Suddenly, a black aura appears around his body, and the whites of his eyes turn black. The system informs him that the black bracelet allows him to see dead souls and that his dragon vision skill has been given permission to use the item. The proficiency of the dragon vision skill has increased by 13.5%, so he ends up seeing several souls in front of him and tells him that those souls are actually the victims he and Akasha's serpent killed. He wonders if they've been wandering around like this all this time, and is surprised that he hasn't been cursed by any of them yet. Suddenly, the spirits notice his presence and start showing a lot of hatred. Kanan thinks that this might actually be for the best. It will be a good way to test his artifact. He then starts attacking those souls, and the number of souls he takes begins to increase. He says he's going to test the black blade gum in sequence. To him, it looked like dark magic, and spells with dark attributes improve the user's attack and cause curses on enemies. He concludes that it's better for attacking. Kanan tests it by launching an attack and says it's better than he thought. Judging by the corrosive damage caused, each attack contains the curse attribute. That was the power of the bracelet alone. What would happen if he used it with his other skills? He begins to reap more souls and mixes that power with his burning flame, but suddenly everything gets out of hand and explodes. He narrowly misses being hit by the explosion. He says that explosion could easily have blown the head off an orc or even a lizard man, and that was the power of just 5 souls. Imagine if he used all his remaining souls. The system informs him that the number of souls he has taken is 150. He then says that this means he can split the power of 150 souls over the next few attacks, or perhaps just use a single attack. But either way, it looks pretty good for him. Saving an explosive attack for later will be extremely useful. He now decides to see what the rewards were for killing monsters. He receives the Monster Hunter title and thinks that he should have received 4 rewards in total, if he's not mistaken. The system explains that the Monster Hunter title is a D title for players who have killed numerous monsters and that he can hunt monsters more efficiently. However, the monsters killed by the player can now curse him when he dies. Now finally, he understands why so many souls follow him like that. That was the reason. He also received the Eye of the Goblin King as a reward. The description says that after dying, Cranon the Goblin King left his eye as a symbol of his resentment. By simply wearing it, the player will feel Cranon's resentment and be affected by it in various ways. Despite this, the player may have more luck if they use it correctly. The eye will become a very useful tool. The system seems to say that due to the Goblin King's resentment, the player will be surrounded by a buff that prevents them from being affected by the enemy's resentment. The player will receive a 10% increase in attack damage thanks to Cranon's spirit. The player will also receive a 15% increase in resistance to poisons and curses. Okay, so that means that the thing will improve his attack and resistance to curses and poisons. He comments that it would be good to use it in conjunction with the black bracelet. By putting them together, his attack will increase considerably, since grudges and curses strengthen dark attributes, and this gem really was the same thing. The system talks about the 5-colored gem of monsters, the description of which is that of a gem created with the resentment of the 5 races of monsters: goblins, kobolds, gnomes, lizardmen, and orcs. It contains an ability from each race. The character says he likes the fact that it enhances each of his senses, so it's mentioned that he's been given the goblin's steps, making him more agile, the kobold's ears, which make him hear better, the gnome's nose, which allows him to smell smells better, the lizardman's eyes, which give him the ability to see at a greater distance, and the orc's hands, which make his hands stronger. He mentions that the eyes, ears, and nose will improve his keen senses ability, while the hands and feet will improve his sneak attack ability. He says it's as if those items were made especially for him. Changing scene, he was talking to Gallard. The elf asked him if he was thinking of leaving Block F, and Kane said yes. Gallard says it makes sense, since he took everything he could there. He thinks he knew that Kane was no ordinary player the first time he saw him, especially when he saw him use the stealth skill so well. That boy was beginning to remember someone from his past, imagining that the two of them had a connection. It's said that anyone who enters the tower has their own past, and it's that past that determines determines how they move forward. If it weren't for that, they would have no reason to leave their worlds and lives to enter this difficult game. Gallard mentions that he has something else for him and asks Kane to take that sword. Kane asks what it is, and he replies that it belonged to the last opponent he faced and that it was an excellent sword. He then tells Kane to use it, but if he didn't want to, he could take it to sell to the secret seller, as it can be sold for a high price. Kane thinks that its balance was very good and that the blade was also sharp, so he definitely considers it a good sword. However, his main weapons are all one-handed blades, such as daggers or short swords, so he decides to keep it with him until he sells it, as Gallard suggested. Gallard then mentions that this is just a curiosity, since he was blacklisted by Arang. Their main headquarters are in F block, so things will probably get a bit more tense from now on. Kane asks what he was talking about, and the elf asks if Kane wasn't opposing the Arang group. The pendant attached to the sword was an Arang symbol. Kane was surprised, as they weren't just a group of thieves, but the Sword Clan of the South. He thinks that his brother and Artia led groups of thieves. The Arang group emerged as an organization of humans, and their main strategy was to hide the fact that they were leading thieves by claiming that they were keeping the public safe. C and Doily will confront Arang after they find out, as they are strong enough to take care of themselves. But if their opponent is the Arang group, things change completely, as there are countless players affiliated with the Southern Sword Clan, and who knows how many powerful players are members of them. The clan is among the 8 largest clans in the tower, and he wonders if it would be possible for 2 people to challenge that entire clan. The Southern Sword Clan has faced Artia before, so they would be ready in a heartbeat. If those 2 had managed to deal with that group, rumors would have spread throughout the block by now, but that didn't happen, meaning that Kane and Doily were either defeated or dead. He then starts to think about whether they would be considered close or distant associates, and wonders if he should get involved in this. Kane starts to remember a lot of good times he had with those 2, and wonders why he was thinking about it. Besides, his brother has always been his hero, and he hopes that his pain won't change the kind of person he is. That was the last thing written in Young-hoo's diary, and what he will do has already been decided. It is said that there were 5 swords piercing his brother's heart. 3 of them belonged to people called kings. 1 was from his love, and the last was from a person he believed to be his friend. Changing the scene, Gallard asks if he has decided to go to war, and Kane asks how he knew that. The elf replies that he can see the signs, as he comes from a warlike tribe, and a long time ago he too was a war-mad fool. That's why looking at Kane reminds him of his old self. Gallard says that Kane's attitude and piercing eyes show that he is ready for war, and the atmosphere emanating from him is the same as when he first met him. However, now he seems to have a much stronger conviction, and if someone like him hadn't noticed the difference, he would have been completely blind. He then asks Kane if he needs his help. Kane thinks that if Gallard went with him, this fight would definitely go faster since he's just as strong as the Hunkers and should even be able to take on Arang alone. However, Kane ends up telling him that he didn't need to worry about that, as this war was his. Kane reflects that saving Khan and Doi wasn't his goal. His main objective is to pursue his brother's revenge, and stirring up the Blue Sword Clan is a step towards that. He can never pass this mission on to anyone else. That war will be taken into his own hands. Gallard then comments that it won't be easy for Kane, and he replies that things have never been easy. Gallard says he's right and wishes him good luck on his mission, so they say goodbye. As Kane walks along, he wonders why the Blue Sword Clan keeps building human farms. Honestly, running a human farm is very inefficient. If the aim is to steal artifacts from other players, then they could do just that. But why go so far as to run a dull human farm, even after Artia has dealt with them? He then thinks that something wasn't right, something the public shouldn't know about, something very big. If he can find out what it is and use it in his plans, he can use it against the Blue Sword Clan, who hurt his brother and Artia in particular. The Blue Sword Clan, from where one of the people pierced his brother's heart with a clan sword. He reflects that it's sooner than he expected, but it seems that his war is only just beginning. In that case, he needs to be fully prepared for it, and the time he has left is very short. There are less than 4 days left. He needs to deal with Arang in 3 days, and finish the tutorial in the time that remains. He needs to make them panic and attack them without letting them rest. When they're exhausted, he goes in and hits them where it hurts. Then he thinks that the Arang headquarters shouldn't have a single person left. In an hour, he'll finish the whole thing in just 1 day. The scene switches to Arang's base in F block, where Buildit is asking where he is. A man replies that they haven't been able to locate him yet, as F block is a vast wilderness. Buildit then says that that guy always seems to be making trouble wherever he goes. He thinks that, unexpectedly, he managed to reduce 70% of Arang's size with the onslaught of the monsters, and that he can't even get in touch touch with the rookies from the first squad who were going to join the Blue Sword clan in the future. In addition, he has completely destroyed the group of thieves that was recently created after Artia destroyed the old empire. He reflected that the other members of Arang had been swept away, and that the members of the tutorial branch had completely disappeared. It wasn't wrong to say that that group was destroyed at that point. All the work and progress that has been made over the last few years has been destroyed. It's like a death sentence. In any case, they'll have to revive Arang before the people of Ilion catch on. He thinks there are a little over 3 days left, and honestly, it will be impossible to rebuild the group with that much time. The island will know what happened after the tutorial is over, and he won't be able to escape such a situation. If that's the case, then there's only one option left, completed in quotes. If he succeeds, he will be guaranteed a seat in the higher ranks. He then says that the man was extremely clear about how it should be created. He comments that the only reason it hasn't been finished yet is that the process is too tedious, and the materials needed, whether players or monsters, are always in short supply. Then he ends up thinking about something and says that now that he's stopped to think about it, they've just got their hands on some high-quality material. The masked guy. He was thinking about how he could take advantage of this, and whether it could be related to that situation too. The man then says that the best they could find out was that he was also coming to F Block. Build It then asks them to search for him throughout F Block and bring him in immediately. Changing scenes, Build It asks how the Bloody Sword and the Foxtail are doing. Thus, we see that Khan and Doi are completely bloodied and tied up. Khan asks if he has anything to say now, and if he doesn't think they've threatened their veterans enough. Build It replies that it's nothing like that, and that he only came to say one thing, since the two of them will soon become material for a stone. Then it said that the reason Arang and the thieves teamed up to kill players was to create a product through experiments, something that should never have existed. Baitan says that originally they were going to slowly melt them down into essence, but at that moment they didn't have any more time for that, and that they were very lucky, because their pain will end much sooner than planned. Dog thinks he doesn't really care about dying, since it's his fault for being an idiot and attacking them head-on. But if he thinks about Doi, he ends up feeling very guilty, because Doi was a good child who left home and followed him because he trusted him, like an older brother. He wishes he could somehow free him so that he could live a little longer. However, he said that it was all pointless, and that he was in the same situation as he had been in the past. Suddenly they hear a very loud noise, and Build It wonders what it could be. The building was built to withstand earthquakes, so what could be happening outside to cause a sound like that? Just then, a man arrives and informs Build It that they have serious problems because there is an intruder outside. Build It wonders why this is happening right now and asks where this person is. Switching scenes, we see that the invader is actually Kane. He activates his Goblin Steps ability and advances towards his enemies, knocking down several people at once. With the Goblin King's eye, he senses a presence of danger in an unknown location. He then uses his Gum of the Black Blade and goes after other people. The number of souls taken rises to 115 and then 118. The others start running, calling him a monster. Kane then unleashes his power on other people, causing them to explode. Those present wonder how he managed to do it. Kane says that if they won't go to him, then he will go to them. Just then, Build It appears and orders him not to move. All of Build It's men are happy at his arrival. Build It comments that it's the masked guy again, and thinks about how a rat like Kane has managed to hide for so long and how he dares to step in there. At that moment, Kane wonders what's going on, because that man's presence is very familiar, even though he's never met him before. He also thinks that he wouldn't forget an aura like that. Suddenly, Kane is startled to think that there are 5 swords in his brother, going through his heart. 3 of them belonged to people called kings, 1 was the weapon of a loved one, and the last was the weapon of a person he believed to be his friend called Leonti. He reflects that his brother thought Leonti was his closest friend, and could always rely on him. Expecting this friend ended up driving a sword through his heart. Leonti always hung out with a group of players he called brothers, and one of them was wearing an arrogant smile, while his brother was being stabbed. That person was actually Build. At that moment, Kane was filled with hatred at the sight of that man, and thought that this would be his first gift to his brother. Build It then sends Gyar a message to the island, informing him that a strange man is attacking Arang. The instant this happens, the man's head explodes. Kane asks Build It to stop wasting time and go after him, without even considering the idea of running away. Build It replies that everything is fine, and judging by the way Kane advanced to the front door, he should be pretty confident. Now he's going to show how useless Kane's power is in front of him, and go on the attack. The two start fighting, and Kane manages to dodge Build It's attacks, while Build It also dodges Kane's attacks. He thinks that Build It is one of the best offensive players in the Blue Sword clan, and wonders why someone like him would be in the tutorial, and in the Orang group on top of that. The Orang group is made up of scavengers, and the Blue Sword clan runs human farms with that bastard behind Build. After betraying his brother, Leonti joined the Blue Sword clan as an executive, but he always hated not being able to work as a leader. A person like that will always have a plan, and Orang is something that exists only to cover that plan. He reflected that everything was now starting to fit together in his mind. Just then, Kane starts to land a few blows on Build It, who thinks it's impossible. He's supposed to be just some amateur who gained some skills in the tutorial, but how was that masked guy managing to take him on so easily? Kane then says that he finally gets it, and that Build It was a piece of shit at fighting. Even though it seems like he was good in the past, his claws ended up falling off while he was wasting time with those miserable dogs. Build It wonders if he knows Kane, so who the hell is this masked guy? Kane activates incantations at full power and lunges at Build It, ripping the guy's arm off. Suddenly, some of Build It's soldiers step in front of him, ordering him to stop and that they need to protect Mr. Building. However, Kane kills them all with ease. Build It asks everyone to stop immediately, but the men are too scared. At that moment, Build It activates his puppet ability and says that he has never had to use it before. He can't believe he's being forced to use it now. By this time, while those guys were distracting Kane, Build It was running for his life, saying that he needed the stone right now because he was sure he could kill Kane with it. After a while, Kane managed to eliminate everyone who was there, and thought that was basically the end of the Orang group. However, there was still one special person missing, Build. Turning to Kane, he wondered what the hell was going on outside, as the noise was absurd. Then he commented that he was thinking of running away too, and couldn't believe he'd be buried alive in there. How could they be so unlucky? At that moment, Doily woke up and asked him what he was talking about. Kane replied that he was the only unlucky one there. Doily then said that he was only caught because he was following Kane. Kane asked him if he was saying that he was lucky to be tied up like that, and Doily explained that he was just keeping him company since he was never lucky at anything. Kane asked why he was telling jokes now, and if he was trying to rebel against him. The Doily replied that it was a promise he had made to himself, to rebel at least once before he died. Kane said that it didn't matter because he'd given up fighting. He wondered what Kane was doing at that moment. Doily commented that he was probably going through G-Block, even without their help. Kane, smiling, said that if he had known things would turn out this way, he would have told Kane where the relic was, and he could have used it instead of them. Just then, Kane came into the room and said that they could talk now too, which surprised both of them. Kane then unlocked their chains and said that they both looked very finished. Doily asked why he was there, and Kane explained that he had taken a break on the way. Kane thought they parted too abruptly and thanked Kane, who said he could tell him the location of the relic if he was really grateful. Kane commented that he was a bastard, trying to get out on top. At that moment, Kane felt his body pulsing and imagined that they might finally get out alive. Doily, on the other hand, thought that they would only be a burden to Kane if he tried to escape like that. Even though he was grateful to him for saving their lives, it would be better if he left them behind. When Kane tried to say that he would help in the fight, Kane said that he had already killed everyone, so they didn't need to worry about that. The Doily, incredulous, asked if he had really wiped out the Orang group. Kane confirmed it, and Doily angrily questioned why he was only answering Doily and not him. Kane then said that there was a catch. Build It was still alive. Kane asked if Build It had gone down there, and Kane thought he was right, because there was a secret down there. Kane wanted to know if he knew what was down there, but Kane replied that he wasn't sure exactly what it was, but he knew that those bastards were creating something with the lives of the other players. Changing the scene, they came to a corridor full of blood, with several doors. Kane wondered if this was a human farm, and realized that they had hidden the place very well. The smell of rotting bodies was incredibly strong, and he wondered how many people they had trapped there. He was sure that there had been more people there a few days ago, and that they had probably gotten rid of them in that time. The best materials for alchemy are the human body and soul. Processes involving these materials were banned from the tower because they were extremely dangerous and costly. However, creating something that requires immense quantities of bodies and souls could only be a great thing. Kane thought that all that mattered were the results, not the methods. Build It really was a poisonous rat, and he needed to get rid of him now that Kane and Doily were free. At that moment, Kane saw several souls behind him and thought that they were the souls of the sacrificed players. Kane asked if they wanted to help too, and if they did, he had a condition for them. He asked if all those souls were interested. Just then, Build It entered a room and came across the mysterious stone. He wondered how long he had spent just doing that, while his companions had risen in rank in the meantime. He had to be very very patient, and wanted to prove to the king that he was also a subordinate, worthy of his services. But now survival came first, so he ended up swallowing the stone. He thought that Lord Leonte had told him that his magic would increase considerably just by swallowing that stone. He said that one of two things would happen. If his body couldn't handle the stone, it would explode, but if it could, his body would undergo great changes. Lord Leonte also commented that the complete stone would have no risk of exploding, so the aim was to create a stone as close to a complete one as possible. Build It then thought that nothing happened when he swallowed the stone, and that something must have already happened. He wondered why nothing was happening to his body and whether he had lost something. Just then, Cain appeared behind him, asking if that was as far as he could go. Cain then commented that the stone they had made didn't look like much, and that things were going the way he wanted. Build It wondered why it wasn't working in his body. He then asked Cain why he was bothering him like that, and what the hell he had done to him. He wondered why Cain had such a grudge against them, and what they had done to him. Why did that guy have to meddle in his affairs? Cain answered if he was really asking all that. He then took off his mask and asked if Build It really wanted to know about his grudge, which would answer his question. When Build It looked at Cain's face, he was very surprised. He exclaimed that this could only be impossible. Cain said that they probably had no idea how much he wanted to see them again. Build It wondered how Young Hu could be in that place. It was then revealed that Cain learned many things while torturing Build It after Young Hu's death and the dissolution of Artia. The tower has undergone drastic changes, and much of this is due to the fact that the goal of the alliance between the 8 clans to wipe them both out has been fulfilled. At that point, the tower's power shifted. The surviving members of Artia went their own way, conquering what they wanted, since there was no one else standing in their way. Cain thought he wanted to believe that at least someone would feel guilty about what they had done to him, but unlike Young Hu, everyone there thought the decision they had made was normal. At that moment, Build It begged Cain to kill him right away, but Cain said it was a shame, because he always did the opposite of what people asked. Besides, he still had a lot of friends he was looking for. Cain then installed his fingers and some souls appeared. He thought that these were the souls that had been strengthened by the black bracelet, and they swore that they would serve in exchange for the power to take revenge on Build It for his unjust deaths, as a sacrifice for the stone. At that moment, those souls set out to attack Build It, who started shouting, saying that he had already told them everything they wanted to know, and that they should just let him die in peace. Cain, however, ignored this and left. Changing the scene, Cain thought he had thought it was all over there, but there were still many members left, even though the base had been destroyed. Suddenly he saw a completely disfigured body and thought it looked like Build. He wondered if he was trying to escape and begged him to kill him quickly, but in the end, he really still wanted to live. He then looked at the stone he had made. Cain commented that because he couldn't identify that stone, it probably meant he couldn't use it. The system then explained that it was a purple stone, but it couldn't be identified. Cain commented that these types of items were usually considered garbage in F-Block, and that they had killed countless players for a flawed product of this type. Even so, he couldn't leave it behind and decided to keep it with him, until he found out what he could do with it. When he picked up the stone, it began to glow in his hand, and then began to fall apart, little by little. Suddenly, that aura entered his body, and he wondered what it was, since he wouldn't move even if he used magic, and that was starting to make him very uncomfortable. At least now he could find out more about it. The system then explained that the item had been sealed and could no longer be activated. Cain wondered if that was all he could know, but the system said that it was a unique artifact and that the item was the only one of its kind in the tower. Therefore, his information could not be shown. The artifact was incomplete and needed to be completed, and when it was finished, its information could be identified and unlocked. Cain commented that at least this was certain. The stone was not flawed but complete, and it also required a different process to be completed. Before it was completed, it would be kept close to his heart, without affecting him. He thought he didn't feel very good about it, but there was nothing he could do about it at the moment. So he commented that it felt like it had come to an end. Changing the scene, it was already night, and Cain commented that they could get out of there, so Cain and Doily climbed out of the rocks. Cain commented that he had thought this for a long time, but that it was really on a completely different level. Cain asked him what he was talking about, and Cain replied that he really couldn't help himself at that moment. They might even have their own problems, but why would Cain go after them? Cain said he didn't really know what he was talking about, and Cain wondered if he was still trying to look mysterious in that situation. At that moment, Doily asked what had happened to Build It, and Cain replied that he was already dead. Doily, smiling, said that this was a real relief, but then Doily's expression changed. He thought that he couldn't believe that the Blue Sword clan would do something like this. He wanted to take Build It into his own hands, but he knew he wasn't strong enough for that. He therefore needed to get stronger immediately, as they would never know when they would have to face a stronger opponent in the future. Cain said that all those wretches were dead now, and that they just needed to go a little further, but his body was already limp just from taking a few steps. He told Doily that he thought that would be as far as they could go at the moment. Doily, Smiling, agreed. Kane then asked what Doyley's plans were now and if he intended to go to G Block. Kane confirmed this, but only if he could. He threw a bag into Kane's hand, saying that this was all they had collected so far, and that they didn't really need it anymore. If Kane was trying to give it back, he didn't want to, because, as he said, he didn't need it. Kane commented that they were thinking of withdrawing from the tutorial, and while he was blowing things up outside, he and Doyley were talking about it. Besides, they couldn't go to Block G in the state they were in, as they would become food for weaker players and wouldn't be able to increase their ranks. Doyley said that this was why they had decided to give up in the final round of the tutorial and try again next time. Honestly, they didn't have any reason. Unless he was first in the rankings. Kane thought that the reward for the player who came first in the rankings was immense, so they were desperate for points. Kane asked if it was possible to try again after giving up on a round. The Doyley then questioned whether he hadn't known this several rounds ago, and that this was why many players tried to challenge others as much as they could. Kane realized that he had thought all along that a player would only have one chance to do the tutorial, and that the diary didn't say anything about it, so he ended up stressing himself out for nothing. He said that his brother really was an idiot. However, the tutorials have no set date. The tower only opens in case of need, so there's no way to be sure how long someone can wait for the next round of the tutorial. Kane thought that it was still a lot of fun for him. He managed to get rid of that damn build it and also meet some good players. Kane asked if they were telling him to take it and go, and Doyley replied that it would be much better than throwing it away. Besides, he thought that if Kane went there, he could teach those bastards from Fant and Idora a lesson. Kane remembered that he had heard their names several times. Their names were always at the top, no matter when he looked at the ranks, and he would probably face them in G Block. Kane asked what they were like. Doyley replied that they were actually monsters. He had tried to pass them several times, but they really were monsters. What he was trying to say was for Kane to use that and steal first place, which would mean that they would be making room for Kane. It would just be an exchange. Kane thought that was fine, and that he would do his best. Doyley then said that this was very good, and this was how it really should be. That's what he called honor, friendship, and loyalty, and that's exactly what he was expecting from Kane. At this point, they put the crown they had gotten on Kane's head and started laughing, saying that he looked very funny with that crown. Kane then thought that he had 2 days left and one more block to go. He needed to run, as he didn't have much time left. Then he was told that the secret needed for the crown of the Kovir of Argon was deep down, hidden in the nest of the thorny mole. He began to eradicate the thorny moles as he descended to the place Kane and Doyley had indicated. At that moment, he stumbled into the boss room, and that monster really was much stronger than he had expected. Strong enough to make him doubt whether it was stronger than Akasha's serpent. If he hadn't had an attack buff from Argon's crown, he might have been buried alive or devoured by that monster. Afterwards, he saw the sword and commented that it was Kane and Doyley's trump card, and they were planning to use it against those brothers. Just then, a goblin was watching Kane and commented that the player was very greedy. He had gotten rid of Akasha's snake and Harang's group, and was now getting his hands on Vigrid. A player who started a week late managed to monopolize the secret relics and swept Harang. No matter how much he watched that guy, he actually found him very interesting. He wondered what he could do with less than 12 hours left. He then commented that these things were truly exciting when he was the only one who knew about them. Without having the highest rank of managers, those security cameras couldn't be seen. He had heard that there were managers who were kicked out of the tower because of their deals with players, and if Lar, that should be enough. He then says that now comes the grand finale. The system then announces the final block of the tutorial, and he enters Block G. He ends up seeing a floating staircase that leads to a floating island and thinks that he has finally arrived there. That was the last phase of Block G. The system then informs him that the G block test has begun. He comments that the information was very similar to that of Block E and Block F because of the token war. The system then tells him that the players must challenge each other in this area, and the more players he challenges, the more KMA points he receives. He concludes that it's basically a PvP stage, which explains the chaos in those people's eyes. He remembers what Young-Hoo said about Block G, a B-Royal and a madhouse, a place where players at the top are trapped in a single area. Because of this, it's a place where ranks can easily be changed. He wonders what is going on at that moment, feeling a very powerful energy coming from there. The people in front of him talk about how those two were monsters, and how people like them could be in the tutorial. Then a man comments that it's very funny to see everyone trying to stay on their feet. He then thinks of a fang slightly visible through his lower lip, and the other person, who had purple hair, golden eyes, and a horn growing out of his temple. Those two were Fant and Aurea from the Horned tribe. He talks about the One Horn tribe. Among the different beings that exist in the tower, they are called incarnations of the subconscious. That guy was Fant. He then asks what they're doing standing there and if they haven't come to finish him off. He asks everyone to hurry up and tells them to move since they're all idiots. But if they didn't want to do that, he would go to them himself. He then starts attacking everyone in front of him, claiming that they were all absolutely nothing. The people left behind were completely horrified, but then he finished them off too. He thinks that he really was very strong, and that it doesn't surprise him that he managed to kill Akasha's snake. But there's also that other girl, Idora. She's Fant's younger sister, and she's the first person in the tutorial rankings. That's what Kane said about Idora. Kane then mentions that Fant was very strong, like facing a huge mountain, but Idora is very different. She's not as rough as Fant, and it's like you're looking at the bottom of an ocean. That's why she's very scary. On the mountain, at least you can see the peak, but you can't see the bottom of the ocean. Kane then thinks that he now understands why Kane said that about her. She is hiding something very mysterious, something tremendous and fierce. Suddenly, she notices Kane's presence. He notices that the woman has a very calm look on her face, staring straight at him, as if she sees something. At that moment, she began to smile at him, and he thought he had been discovered. He wanted to observe the situation further, but he thinks he's gone as far as he can go. So at that moment, he needs to do something quickly to stand out. He takes that bag he got from Khan and Doily, and throws all those pebbles on the ground. People wonder why he's doing this, and why he's throwing everything on the floor. They wonder if he's thinking of withdrawing from the tutorial for fear of Fant, thinking it was a waste. However, this attitude ends up attracting a lot of attention from Idora. Everyone comments that he's going mad, and there at least should be 2,000. Just then, Kane tells them to combine them, and those stones start to glow. The system then informs him that the tokens he collected in blocks E and F are being combined. A gigantic golden ball is formed. The system informs them that the tutorial rank has been updated. To the surprise of everyone there, Kane ended up passing Idora, becoming the first in the tutorial rankings, which left everyone there very surprised, saying that it really was impossible. This was the first time since the beginning of the tutorial that someone had taken first place. Kane then comments that he's already taken the bait and wonders if he should try something out. He then pulls out his Vigrid sword. Its description is that it was a highly coveted sword, forged in the Forgotten Silver Age. However, thanks to the immense amount of blood that bathed it, the frozen sword killed its last owner, turning into a demonic sword. 3 decades have passed since it was last wielded, and it still remains in a demonic state, unable to return to its original condition due to the resentment it carries. For it to return to its old form, the player must fulfill certain conditions to completely remove the demonic resentment. Most of her abilities have been sealed, and certain conditions are required to unlock them. Everyone wonders what the hell that is, and what relic he's holding. They wonder if such a powerful weapon exists, and where he managed to find such a thing. People then say that if they split it up, they could be among the highest ranks. Besides, he has no team and no one to watch his back. He's just a solo player. If they manage to catch him, they'll definitely secure their places, and Fant and Idora will probably have to face him too, even though he's a very strong guy. It will be very impossible for him to fight against all those people there. It is said that the Vigrid originally appeared as a weapon wielded by legendary heroes or transcendental warriors in great battles. Even with most of its abilities sealed away after becoming a demonic sword, the few that remain still make it immensely powerful. The first is the blessing of the sword. The system then talks about the sword's blessing. The resentment of its former bearers caused Vigrid to turn its blessing into a curse. Khan then mentions that this was the main function Khan and Doily were looking for. The system informs them that the power of the black aura will be amplified according to the numerical or strength disadvantages of the opponents in relation to the player. C then comments that the stronger Fant and Idora are, the more powerful Vigrid will become. Doily notes that this will help to reduce the difference in strength between them. Kane thinks that this was Kane and Doily's plan to reach those two, and when the black aura reaches its limit, he'll be able to amplify its power even more using the souls he's kept. Everyone began to wonder what the strange thing was, so Kane goes after everyone, finishing off several people in a matter of seconds. Kane then reflects that Khan and Doily may have focused on the blessing of the sword, but there was a secret option. Everyone wondered about that green aura that was appearing, as there was something very strange going on there. The system then talks about the contagion of the blessing. The last victim to be killed will pass on the curse to nearby players, and these infected players will have their defenses and movements reduced. Everyone starts choking up, wondering what kind of curse that was. So Kane, without any difficulty, ends up finishing them off too. He thinks it should take care of the weakest, and the next on his list would be Idora. At this point, Fant gets very excited about the situation and says that this is what he's been talking about all along. This is what he's really been waiting for until now. He wants a real fight, not a brawl with weaklings. He then asks Idora if he can go. She replies replies that she can't remember the last time he asked permission to do something, but says that she won't pick on him this time, and that he could do whatever he wanted, but he'd have to leave it up to her. He says he'd almost forgotten about it and gives it to her. At that moment, the tutorial rank was changed again and Idora passed Kane. The people then say that they can't believe he gave it all to his sister, since there must have been at least 60,000 tokens in there, and that he would have had to go all the way to hell to get it. Fant then tells them not to compare themselves to them, as they are completely different from all those trash. Fant thinks he was so excited because he'll finally be able to fight with everything he's got. Among the One Horn tribe, the Shanghanan family has a secret skill that is only passed down to a descendant and is called Lightning Fists. He says that he can only take the points back, and those points are the points of fame. He then goes after our protagonist. The two forces end up colliding, causing a huge explosion. Fant comments that Kane is really good at blocking his lightning attack and asks if they could go again. Kane then launches an attack with his sword in Fant's direction, and Fant thinks that could be very dangerous. He defends himself, saying that this is impossible, as he was born into the royal family and has learned various fighting techniques, even increasing his magic by consuming the core of the Akasha serpent. Even so, he is being pushed back by that blow. His body is then completely covered in blood. Smiling, he says that, in order to become the next king, his father taught him that backing down doesn't exist in their vocabulary. King's Domain is the name of the skill his father gave him so that he could prove himself worthy of inheriting the throne. Fant thinks this is all great fun and he's starting to get excited. He never thought he'd meet such a worthy opponent, especially in that tutorial. He charges at Kane with all his might, and Kane is starting to find it very difficult to block his attacks. At this point, Idora just watches. Just then, Fant lands a blow on the ground, but Kane dodges it. Kane then thinks that the attack made the dust rise and cover the whole area, and now he can't see where Fant is coming from. But it's all the same to him. Suddenly, Fant is already after our protagonist, with a psychopathic look on his face, which surprises Kane a lot. So Fant ends up hitting our protagonist over and over again, causing him to spit blood. Just as he was falling, Fant ends up grabbing his head, saying that he's done with him now. He is then told that this is what should have happened, but there is a secret move that he has never used before, called Foresight. Kane thinks that before going to G-Block, he looked up details about this ability. The system then speaks, Foresight Special Skill Efficiency, 0.5% description, a skill that allows the user to see future events. The distance of the prediction depends on the player's magic power. The player will suffer extreme disorientation as a penalty after using this skill. Kane thinks that it has taken him a long time to reflect on this and feels that it would be a waste to abandon this skill at that moment. Looking into the future is undoubtedly an absurd advantage, even if only for a moment. He could never do better than that. In his years of service, there have been countless situations in which mistakes on the battlefield have caused the loss of countless lives, and if he had been able to see into the future, even for a few seconds, he could have saved many lives. However, compared to its short use, the skill consumes a huge amount of mana. The prediction will only show a few seconds into the future, and each second will cost a huge amount of mana. To use the skill, you need to have at least 2/3 of the player's total mana, and currently they will be able to see the future as an afterimage for 5 seconds. The problem, in fact, is knowing when to use it. It won't be easy to get the timing right, since he doesn't know when and where his life will be in danger. Seeing only 3 seconds into the future won't be enough, as he'll also need to analyze and decide what to do when facing an opponent. That skill is much harder to use than it looks. He then wonders what would happen if he used as much foresight as possible, and if it failed. His death would surely be certain, but it seems that this exchange went much better than he expected, so the fight between the two continues. He then says that he will use the opportunity he received from the forecast. To do so, he will activate his dragon vision, combat determination, and sharp senses to reinforce his body. After using Shunpo to increase his speed, he will unleash the power of his magic circle. At this point, Kane ends up immobilizing Fant's arm, landing a blow, and then activates the blessing of the sword again, landing a point-blank blow on Fun. Kane then thinks that, in the remaining second, he will go after his final target, which, in this case, is Idora. As he approaches her, she draws her sword and ends up defending herself against Kane's attack. He thinks that what he discovered in his prediction will be the next scene. Idora will be unconscious due to blood loss from his attack. Suddenly, however, she manages to block the attack. He says he didn't make a mistake, because it was different from what he had predicted. Idora then says that he is strong. In fact, very strong. He begins to observe her eyes and realizes that, whatever she is hiding, she was able to see through his prediction. Guys, for part 2 of this work, leave 1,000 comments here asking for part 2, and also 8,000 likes. If all these targets are met, I'll bring you part 2. Don't forget that channel members get to watch all the videos without ads. But that's it. Thank you very much for watching me so far. Until the next video, and thanks.